Sorry. Thank you. It's beautiful, isn't it?
You're very Chinese.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. It's the second day. We had a very intense and instructional day yesterday. I am very pleased to see this small but high-quality audience that we've gathered here today. And I thought we'd bring you into the conversation right from the start by asking who you are and what you'd like to get out of the seminar today. You can speak in Thai. You speak in Thai. Yes.
Could you repeat your question again?
Yeah, who you are
Okay.
and what you hope to get out of the seminar today.
Okay.
And speak in Thai. Take the microphone.
I'm a teacher in Paharuthai Convent School, and today I think is new experience for me.
Fantastic. And you?
Okay. I'm Thanapat. I'm teacher from St. Raphael School, and what I expect today, I think I want to know how the international looks at the assessment.
Yes.
Yeah, for the student.
That's fantastic.
Something like that. Yeah.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Let's go round to the back of the room. People trying to hide.
I am Somruthai Cheyapo. I'm from IPST. I want to learn about and experience as a formative assessment to improve my work.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Putter, and I'm also from IPST. I work for the Educational Assessment Unit, and today I'm very excited to learn more from a leading organization of the world, both OECD and IEA and ASA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That's wonderful. What about you, sir?
Hello, my name is Surachayan Pisupong. I'm the free entrepreneur. Yeah. I spend time to learn about how to apply the innovation into the evaluate the learner.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sompong. I used to be a lecturer for tourism industry. No, I'm retired. So I would like to come and learn more about how to be a great teacher or lecturer. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Hi, I'm Somchai from Thailand. I'm his advisor from Ratchapat University of Ratchapat, Panakhon Sechia.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ek Setipan. I research from Ignite Enterprise.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Chalida, and I am consulting for EEF, and I'll also be moderating the Thai reflection sessions on the third day. So I'm hoping to learn, in addition to state-of-the-art large-scale assessments, and learn about how the Thai agencies can benefit from these reflections and what are the gaps in our understanding and the needs.
That's brilliant.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Vachala. I'm Data Impact Manager at Teach for Thailand. we are an non-profit organization which work to bridge the inequity in Thai education system, and we always interested in the non-academic outcomes for the students. I'm hoping to learn some of the tricks and like a new frontier so that we can apply to our work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I'm hoping today will be very much a conversation between all of us. And I wanted to get you talking right from the start so that you're used to participating in this, so that when we come to questions and discussion, you will all join us. But I think we're ready now for our first presentation, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Hannah Ulferts. When I got home last night, I had an email from OECD telling me about another very exciting webinar they're doing, which has got you on as well. So,
well, surprise! Yes, I will also provide you with the information on the webinar later on, so I hope you can join that one. But first of all, welcome, and thank you EEF and CCE for inviting me to lovely Bangkok. It's really an amazing experience, and now I hope I can actually meet your expectations and provide you with some new insights and push the frontier a bit further, as was wished by some of you. My name is Hannah Ulferts and I work at the OECD. I work currently at in the survey on social and emotional skills and also on PISA 2022. More specifically, I will look at the volume that has a look on the impact of COVID and also on the impact of other contextual factors such as resources and the qualification of staff. So very exciting work, but that's very much focused on academic outcomes and well-being. And today I have the pleasure, to talk a little bit more, to look a little bit beyond academic skills and present you with 3 innovative projects that really look beyond. First, the survey on social and emotional skills. I will mainly talk about round 1 results, but also give you an outlook where we're standing with the second round of the survey. Then a very brief outline of the innovative ways of measuring social and emotional skills. It's a very brand new project, just has been launched this year. And then I hope we can do a little break and you can pose me any question you want. And then afterwards, I will talk a little bit more about the global competencies module, which was part of PISA 2018. So, when we talk about the survey on social and emotional skills, the first question is, of course, why? Why do we need a survey like that? And I think we can now, more than before the COVID crisis, agree that social and emotional skills are really, really important. We need to look beyond academic achievements. Because actually, they do have an impact on individuals' life success, on social relations, on well-being, on civic engagement, but also actually on educational attainment, and also prospect in the labor market, and also physical health. But also beyond talking about individual life success, they are also important for societies, for cohesion in societies, as well as for a prosperous and peaceful future. I think we know that also more than before. And this is also no wonder why they are now a top priority in many countries across the world. And before starting the survey in 2019, we actually started way earlier, 2015, to work on reviewing the literature. What is already out there? What do we know about these skills? And we also did secondary analysis of the data. And I was told that you get later on the slides. And here you will find links to all of the work if you're interested. So from this extensive literature, actually, we came up with a conceptual framework to develop like an idea for how these skills can be really studied. And then there was already a first item trial with 6 sites, just seeing what could work to assess these skills that, well, they've not been assessed that much as academic achievement. And then there was a proper field trial with 11 sites to prepare them for the main survey. And in 2019, based on the experience that we made, there was actually an assessment framework developed, meaning what do we need to assess and how can we assess it? And then in 2019, we already had our main survey data collection, so right before the COVID crisis. And of course, throughout the whole process, we actually had advice from 2 expert groups, one on content and the other one on technical aspects. And also, of course, from our advisory board, the governing board, and also, of course, the countries that are participating to really ensure that the instrument works in their context. So what did we assess? We came up with a framework that assessed 15 different skills across 5 domains. First of all, we thought it's important to understand how students actually approach tasks. Are they responsible? Are they persistent? And do they have the control to really focus on the task at hand, or do they deviate because there's something else coming up? Emotional regulation. Are they resistant to stress? Can they control their emotion? Do they have an optimistic view on life? Collaboration. So are they empathetic? Are they trusting? And can they cooperate well with others? And then open-mindedness. We talked a lot yesterday about it. The importance of creativity, of being curious, and of being also tolerant towards other cultures and other worldviews. Engaging with others looks at, are we sociable? Are we assertive? And do we have energy? Are we approaching life with an energetic approach? And then there are 2 compound skills which are made out of the other skills. It's achievement motivation. Are we motivated to do our best? And are we feeling that we are competent? Self-efficacy. That's the other one. So how did we assess these skills? Well, first of all, a direct assessment. Students reported on their skills, but then also we triangulated this with the reports from parents and from teachers. We used very simple statements like, I like learning new things, an indicator of curiosity, and I stay calm even in tense situation as an indicator of stress resistance. And we used 5-point Likert response scales, saying I completely disagree or I completely agree. And then we had a balanced selection of negatively and positively worded items, to account a little bit for common biases. This is an acquiescence control. That's the tendency of people to just agree or disagree with certain statements. And that was actually taken into account also in the statistical models. But I will not talk too much about the statistical models, but more about the results. So, but give you an overview, an idea for what's behind the survey, not the statistical techniques. But of course, you're free to ask me anything you want. So we assessed the social and emotional skills of 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds. The idea is, of course, 15-year-olds, it's similar to PISA. And it's at the end of schooling for some of the children. They are already looking for a job. So we want to really understand where are they standing before we leave them to the job market in terms of social and emotional development. Then also 10-year-olds, because we want to understand how do these skills develop? What can we do throughout the process? Not just looking at the end, I think, is important. Of course, we also collected a range of contextual information to really understand how these skills are embedded into different learning environments. We collected information from parents, from teachers, and from principals. And overall, we had an assessment of 3,000 students minimum per city, per cohort, meaning in total 6,000. So 3,000 for the 10-year-olds and 3,000 for the 15-year-olds. And we actually managed to really study the skills across really a broad range of different contexts and regions, starting, for example, with Daegu in South Korea and Suzhou in China, and Istanbul in Turkey. In Europe, we had Helsinki and Sintra. We also had Houston in the US, and Canada was represented through Ottawa. And in South America, we had from Colombia, Manizales, and Bogota. And when you look at these broad, different, very broad range of different contexts, then you actually see something that's still astonishing to some people, that actually social skills and emotional skills and academic achievement, they are not like competing outcomes. Yeah? It's not we either have to promote one or the other. They go hand in hand. So it's really important to promote both. Because if we look at the first results, then we actually see that different skills are related to student grades in mathematics. For example, being persistent, being trusting, and being curious are positively related to achievement in mathematics. So sometimes we think of mathematics as very static, but actually it's important that you're curious, that you want to find out how to solve a mathematical problem. We also, that was already briefly discussed yesterday by Todd, negative correlation of creativity and sociability to grades. And we need to ask, I mean, there are different explanations for that, but I think we also need to ask ourselves if our education systems are really made for fostering and acknowledging that some people are creative and coming up with new solutions. And when we look at arts, I will not go through the results, but they look actually very similar. However, after the COVID crisis, I think we can also very much agree that it's not just important to look at student outcomes, but also on well-being. Because again, you cannot expect students to learn well if they are not feeling well. If they are hungry or they have a lot of stress at home and they are not feeling well. So it's really important also to look after their well-being. And the question is, what can we do about their well-being? It's actually an important question because when we look at the psychological well-being of 10-year-olds, then we can actually see that most of them, like over half, agree that they are most of the time calm and relaxed, that they are in good spirit, that they are cheerful. And that's true actually for girls and boys more or less alike. But when we look at 15-year-olds, we see a drop. And for girls especially, which is actually also found in the literature quite a lot, there you see like 40 to 30%, that's now the percentage, so really a substantial drop. So the question really is, what can we do about it? Well, maybe give them like the tools, the skills that they need to have a good, like a good and prosperous or feeling good about themselves, let's say. And when we look at the links that certain skills have, then we actually see that across the different sites here, the colored cells mark significant relationships. If they are green, then they are positive. If they are yellow, they are negative. And you can see that stress resistant, being optimistic, being trusting, and also having a lot of energy is positive for the well-being of 15-year-olds. And very similarly for 10-year-olds, it's important to be optimistic, trusting, and have energy, but also to have a certain emotional control. Another thing that we looked at, and it was also briefly discussed yesterday, is test anxiety. And we discussed that maybe a certain level of being tense or wanting to achieve the best is crucial for having good results, but I think we can also agree that there is a level that's not healthy anymore. And when we look at the results, we actually see that girls overall report higher test anxieties. I don't know, no, the pointer doesn't work, but I hope you can see that girls versus boys, you see that they agree or strongly agree more. And also what we see is that 15-year-olds report higher anxiety. Yeah? So again, there is a tendency towards something not positive. So the question is, what can we do about it? And when we look at the skills, then we see those that are stress resistant report lower anxiety. So making our students stress resistant is something that we should maybe aim for. And that's also true for 10-year-olds. However, we also see that those skills vary by age, gender, and social background. And for example, what we see and what's again quite a sad story is that social and emotional skills seems to drop with age. Just to give you a certain, like a little outlook, we see when we compare 15 and 10-year-olds that actually the 10-year-olds report higher skills in most of the areas. There are a few exceptions, but they are really, really few. So we really have to ask ourselves what's happening there. And of course, there are a lot of different explanations. But I think we can also ask ourselves, can we do something about this drop? Can we restructure our learning environment at school more, like fostering more creativity, fostering more curiosity, keeping our students healthy? And we also see actually that boys and girls indicate that they have different strengths. So you see like a gender-specific profile. Yeah, for example, with boys being more stress resistant, saying they have a higher emotional control, and also being more assertive. Girls, on the other hand, say they are more responsible, more self-controlled, more empathetic, and more cooperative, and also more tolerant. And I should mention at this point that this is actually very important because those skills don't only relate to skills. I didn't put that in the slides right now, but we also see that this actually relates to the expectations of certain jobs and to the expectation of finishing tertiary education. And if we think about gender and gender-specific jobs, I think one way to maybe alleviate that is to give them a more balanced set of skills. What we also see is that the drop is higher for girls than for boys, the drop from 10 to 15-year-olds. So girls are more impacted. So again, it's important to think especially about how to promote the skills in girls. And also, again, that's very similar to academic achievement, and now we see that in students' social and emotional skills. There seem to be, like the social and economic disadvantage seems to come also with a socio-emotional disadvantage in all of the skills. The advantaged students are reporting higher skills. And that's true for 10 as well as for 15-year-olds, even though we see that for 15-year-olds it's a bit less, at least. So there seems to be a little bit of an equalizing going on. Still, it's not sufficient. So I already raised that question. I think that's the key question for a lot of us here. What can schools do about it? And I think schools are actually perfect hubs for social and emotional learning. I mean, this is the first time for some of the students to be confronted with very different worldviews, with different opinions, with the possibility to experience success, to build relationships, sometimes even friendships, and also to learn that the success sometimes, or actually quite often, depends on others. And they have to handle very complex social interactions. They have to try to cope with stress, frustration, and sometimes even failure and rejection, unfortunately. And what we can see is actually that students' sense of belonging is positively related to the various skills. So trying really to promote an environment or to foster a community of learners, a strong community that makes you feel I'm part of this community, could help, or links at least to higher skills in all areas. We also see that the impact of bullying is negative. So if I'm in a school environment where there's a lot of bullying, then I tend to report lower skills. And we also shouldn't forget about the teacher. They play a crucial role. And we actually see that those students that report better student-teacher relations also report better skills. Another way of promoting social and emotional skills is, of course, through extracurricular activities. We studied different extracurricular activities, but this one is about art activities. And actually you see here that those participating in these activities are more creative and more curious. So that's another way, of course, of promoting these skills. But the question is, of course, are schools and teachers ready to do this job? Yeah, and one important thing is that they need to acknowledge that, as I said, academic learning and social and emotional skills are two sides of the same coin. And we actually see in our newest data, which will be released tomorrow morning, actually, and then there's a webinar which was already announced. There we see actually that that most of the students are in schools, like over 90%, that acknowledge that academic achievement is important. So that's, I guess, no surprise. But if we look at if they acknowledge social and emotional skills, it's quite similar. So there is an acknowledgement that this is an important aim of schools, of school principals. But of course, that's not enough. We also need to ensure that we see that the skills are also acquired, that there's an active promotion. And one way, of course, and we talk a lot about this here, I think that's the key focus of this seminar, is that we need to assess these skills. And we actually see that if we look at the PISA data, 93% of the students are on schools across OECD countries that systematically record the test results and graduation rates. If we look at the SSES data, we see that social and emotional skills of 15-year-olds across the cities were only evaluated for 66% of the 15-year-olds. And that's actually more for 10-year-olds, 57%. And I will point to more differences that might actually also explain partly why there is this difference that we observe in skills. Or at least we have to ask us, might that be an explanation? So evaluation is one of the parts. But the other one is, of course, that we need to really actively promote those skills in school. We cannot just simply assess and expect this to happen automatically because, we need to have an active promotion. And if we look at the data, then we actually see that around 90 to 80% do promote these skills through embedding them in their general practices, through how they implement disciplinary rules, or teachers are requested generally to promote those skills in their work, or it's an objective of the educational plan. They also provide feedback to parents, which is of course great, and that's one way to go. But we know, I think, that sometimes there is a risk of social and emotional skills being dropped due to other seemingly competing priorities, such as in the area of academic achievement. Because we see that organizing extracurricular activities or having really separate classes and activities, that's less the case. And we also see here important differences between the two age groups. We see that teachers are less requested, teachers of 15-year-olds, than for 10-year-olds to do that in their job. And also they work less with parents, providing them feedback and advice for how to promote these skills at home. And we talked yesterday it was presented how important it is to work with stakeholders, and we see more results like this. It's really important to team up with parents. And we see also that this is important because it relates to important teacher outcomes. And of course, we know it's important to have teachers that are efficacious and that use active learning pedagogies, and that also have positive relationships to their students. And we actually observe that all of the different means of promotion relate to those teacher outcomes. So we already learned that a lot of schools, 80%, rely on teachers to be the engine of social and emotional education, which makes, of course, sense. However, really doing a good job requires quite a sophisticated set of skills and knowledge, and of course, some good preparation. And if we look at if the teachers actually had input on the different topics, student-teacher interaction, child development, classroom management, methods that involve group activities or developing social and emotional skills, Then we see that around a third say they had the opportunity very much and a lot, but there are also 10 to 20% that say no or very little. And I think we cannot allow this to be the case. And we also see, again, an interesting difference between teachers of 15-year-olds and 10-year-olds. Those of the 10-year-olds seem to be better prepared for teaching or for promoting social and emotional skills. So maybe that's another explanation. And we see actually that this relates to better relationships at school, higher efficacy, and also the use of more active learning pedagogies. All of this and more you can read in a report that was published in 2021. Then there was also a technical report that's more for those of you who are interested in the more technical aspects like reliability, validity of scales, and so on. And also 10 city reports to really have something specific for each of the participating cities, comparing them and doing specific analysis, very helpful for them. And then in 2022, we had a little blog, and I invite you to read that. That's about what the cities actually did in the end with the data, which is, I think, a key question, because sometimes you have the feeling you did a study and then what happened, you know? And there's a few examples of what cities actually did. So what's next? It was already announced. Tomorrow there will be a release of an education spotlight, very much looking at schools as hubs for social and emotional learning, because in the report we focused very much on the skills and how they developed, how they vary by age and so on, but not so much about the school as a learning environment. And I would also like to invite you to sign up. Oh, that happened yesterday. How did you solve it? Just clicking back, huh? Okay. So a little bit of gymnastics for my fingers. So, and that was too quick. Now I'm more empathetic with you. So, I would also like to invite you for our webinar, where we will discuss with Pedro Cunha, who was actually working at the time for Sintra, or for a foundation that worked with Sintra, Stephanie Jones from the Harvard Graduate School, who is also working, or the director of a lab that looks at social and emotional learning, and of course with Andreas Schleicher and myself. And just to give you a quick outlook, but as said, you can also read it in the blog, what did the cities do? Well, first they tried to really actively disseminate the results, which of course is important. They developed a variety of products, local reports, but also translation, of course, of the OECD material. They had media press briefings and so on. And they targeted different audience, not just policymakers, of course, that's very, very important, but also something for students and parents and public at large. They organized various activities, such as conferences, webinars, peer learning meetings, and so on. And what did they use in practice and research? Just to give you some examples, they organized sessions to raise the awareness for different audiences again. And they also informed schools about the students' social and emotional skills in their school. They provided, for example, a diagnosis report for schools. They identified key areas for improvement with schools and then developed an action plan with schools. And that was actually then supported over 2 years with a specialized team. Some of them also worked with Research Institute to really produce research and experience-based tools and support for teachers. And of course, within research, you can now see that within the OECD, a lot of the surveys actually have some of the skills included, not all of them. Our partners from EEF will know that, for example, PISA for Schools has some of the skills and produced some interesting results, not on a representative sample, but some interesting results for Thailand. And PISA also has some of the skills included. So just to give you now a quick outlook on, or overview of what's happening now, because we're actually busy. We don't stop with round 1. We just continue with round 2 because there's more to explore. We have new participants, again, spanning quite a broad range of different contexts. We have India and Delhi, Indonesia, China, Jinan. We have even the Ukraine, which of course will not participate as a total entity, but tries to participate as much as they can. Bulgaria, Helsinki again, actually that's the second time, as well as for Bogota. So interesting to have data from before the crisis and after the crisis. We have Italy, Brazil, Dubai, Chile, Mexico, Spain. Some are participating as whole countries, others are again participating as cities or provinces. For example, Gunma is a province. And where are we standing? Well, we are almost finishing our main survey preparation. We had our field trial successfully conducted last year, and we will soon, very soon, collect the main survey data, which will then be reported in the beginning of our second quarter of 2024. Just to give you a quick outlook of, very quick, very brief, but you can ask me a question if you want. After this, because then we will do a little break as already announced. A little outlook on the innovative approaches to measuring social and emotional skills. It has just been launched, and please get involved. We are interested to hear about interesting research, experts that could be relevant, and also instruments. Because what we try to do here is to really look at rethinking the conceptual foundation of social and emotional skills, and then looking at more direct measures of social and emotional skills that can be game-based, scenario-based, but we are also thinking about looking at the neuroscience approaches. So having a look at if there's a measure that can be measured that relates somehow to brain activity. And then in 2024, we will develop a measurement approach, and design some prototype items which will then be trialed. So, and here I will do a little break before I continue with the PISA 2018 global competencies.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Am I on?
You can also use that one.
That should be on. No. Hello. The little red light. There we go. Thank you very much indeed. I'll go to Federico first.
Sure. Thank you, Anna, and thank you for this thorough overview. I think this is the first international survey of this scale on such a topic, so it's definitely interesting to see how innovative research also turns into operations and then into results. I had a couple of questions. They're a bit like on the details. The results you showed on the teachers, you didn't say how many teachers. Like, is this the teachers who are teaching the students? How many of them? Just to understand the significance of these results and put them in perspective.
Yeah, that varied quite a lot because what the sampling approach was not representative. It was a representative sample of the students, but then not of the teachers, because we really wanted to have the teachers that are very that know their student best. That was the sampling criteria, because we wanted to have this indirect assessment. We will deviate from that in the second round. We will opt for representative samples of teachers. But again, this is why I often talk about students are having teachers like that and that, because that's the representativeness. And it varied a lot because there's different approaches. I mean, in some sites you cannot ask a teacher to rate 10 different students and then fill out a contextual questionnaire. Plus, others said, well, no worries, they can do the extra task, you know. But so it varies quite a lot on how many. But yeah, for all of them, for all of the students, we try to have teachers. Yeah. And actually, just to say, like in the international, I showed mainly the international average. Whenever a sampling criteria, also for teachers or schools, was not met, they were not included, and that's actually then also marked, of course, that this was not. Even though we report the results in case you're interested, but we mark them clearly, so it's clear that there the sampling standards for teachers, for example, was not met.
No, it's because, of course, to contextualize what's behind. And the other thing is, you mentioned that cities made some recommendations to schools. So that actually has some implications about the sample size for each school, because of course, and that also has implications. And then did small schools participate? Because there are places in your sample, like Bogota, there's a lot of small schools as well. And were they involved in the project? Or were they excluded from the sampling because they can be very small, like a school with 10 eligible students in a year, maybe sometimes are excluded, sometimes are not, just to understand.
Yeah, I mean, as you will know, the sampling approach normally is proportional to size, so you have a higher probability of getting sampled when you have a lot of students. But we try to cover as much of the schools, the variety of schools, as necessary. But however, we were also very clear that sometimes we had to exclude certain parts because they were too remote. So with every country, or every city in this case, now it's countries in some cases, we come up with a sampling plan, or our contractor comes up with a specific sampling plan, and we are very transparent for what the results are representative. But sometimes it's just not possible, as you say, like if it's really remote, then maybe cities were saying, okay, we cannot include them. Yeah.
So it's the exclusion criteria and so on.
That, yeah, from the beginning, and then it's very clear that what this is representative of.
Okay. And then one last question. This can be a little tricky. One of your former teammates recently published a paper about acquiescence control. And he was actually showing that it may actually be less beneficial than it was thought in the past. Does this mean you will change some instruments for the next round or not? Because then you would lose comparability. So it's always a tough trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, for now, we are still working with the acquiescence control. I think there are different views. But of course, we always produce scales that are controlled for it or not. So you could also say like, okay, I will stick to these ones that are not controlled, or I will compare them before I run any sort of analysis. I should also mention that the data is actually of round one is available, so for any of you who would like to have a look, you can download them. And also good news, in case you are interested sorry that I used the opportunity, but I forgot to say that, and I think it's important, especially here, that the instrument of round one, the assessment, is also available. You have to contact us. The address is on the slides. You are free to use it if you have a good purpose that you need to outline. We will ask you for what you plan to do.
That's brilliant. Could you go back to the slide where you showed the domains you identified at the beginning?
Oh, that's a long,
it's
again,
a
lot
way
of
back.
gymnastics. Can I even? But that's good for my well-being, I guess. Or someone else can do it. Yeah, maybe that's a better option.
Are you able back there to go back to the beginning of the presentation?
Yeah, I think from there it's easier. Yeah. And there was it's way up.
It's way up at the top. Go back to the top.
There. Yeah, I can just go there.
So I wanted to ask Ricardo first, that when you look at these domains, how do you think they relate to executive functions?
Yes, I was thinking all the time on this topic, and it relates a lot because, you know, innovation and flexibility are learned mainly through play.
Yeah.
And I think one of the really bad results of our Western educational systems is what Todd told yesterday, that children learn a lot in the kindergarten and the preschool about playing, about being with others, about respecting others, and suddenly they come in a system where everything is externally controlled, you know, and they doesn't have time to learn to be controlled by themselves. Okay, and so I don't know if Todd would agree with that, but I think the kindergarten would last at least to the 4th grade, you know. Until the fourth. So they have really time to learn, to live and learn with others. Okay, and not have an external system that obligate them to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, what I was thinking as I was looking there, that there are quite a lot of words like cooperation and tolerance and empathy, which aren't specifically mentioned in executive functions, but it is executive functions which make those possible.
Yes, because I think the educational system gives no time to develop properly the executive functions. You know? And this is because the system does not give the opportunity to children to develop self-regulation.
Yes, absolutely. And therefore, if we focused more on creating the space for executive function, we would get better social and emotional skills.
Definitely, yes.
Okay, and so I was going to ask Todd the same question. Oops, I'll try not to break the equipment in the process. When you look at these domains, how do they relate to your conceptualization of creativity?
Okay. Well, I found that very interesting, this slide, this conceptual framework, because in fact, often creativity is not so much placed in the social skills area, but more in the cognitive skills, together with critical thinking. But it has in it some key social elements. For example, when you create an idea, usually it's for others in the social world. So there is this idea that you have in mind the social public, you're doing something that's not just for you most often when you engage creative thinking. So there is a sort of social skill involved, and you have to sometimes, let's say, pitch or sell your idea to the social world. So there's a communication element. And nowadays, a lot of creative thinking occurs in teams or in dyads, so there's already collaboration. But there is a different connection with creativity here, which is that we have a subdomain of creative thinking which is turned towards solving social problems, often called creative leadership or creative social problem solving. And so it's like there's the math domain, there's the science domain, there's the social domain. So it's a domain of deployment of creative thinking as a content area. And there's also what's sometimes called emotional creativity, which means you are creating an emotional experience, for example, through a poem or a film or something like that. And so you're creating an emotional ambiance, and so this relates to the emotional domain. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts.
Absolutely, those were brilliant thoughts. Thank you. I think that the stressing the social and emotional exactly the way you did. When you make something creatively, you are expressing something, and nearly always you will veer towards taking the opportunity to express emotions. I mean, we've done a lot of projects around the world where we've said to a group of primary school kids, okay, here's a filmmaker, you can make a film, anything you want. And they immediately go, oh, can we make a scary movie? That's it. Immediately, because it's to play with those emotions which they want to deal with, if you see it, and learn to deal with. And therefore, what you are expressing in the creative thing is very often emotion. So, having got their take, would you agree with them about this relationship between executive functions, creativity, and social emotional skills? Yes. Oh, you've got your own microphone. You don't need that.
Okay, I wasn't aware that it's not on. Yes, I was already about to I wanted to jump on and answer directly, so thank you. Yes, actually I think, Todd summarized it as I would have probably summarized it. It's often now not enough to be creative on your own. You need to sell your work, but you also need to work often in groups. It's not just a one-man show often, even now more than before. So I think that's really, really crucial. And yes, I would say, of course, there's a cognitive component. To be more knowledge, the slides, the model that you showed, is important to create something new in the area, but of course we cannot do that alone. Even if you don't have the knowledge, for example, you can build on the knowledge of others to be successful.
Absolutely.
So you bring in knowledge, but just not your collective knowledge, as we sometimes call it. So I think, there's something inherently social actually about being creative, yes. And with regard to executive functioning, yes, I totally agree. We have also a study that looks at 5-year-olds, and that actually includes self-regulation, among other social skills. And yes, I would agree that it's important. Just imagine, you need to control your own feelings, your own thoughts, your own needs to really see the needs and the emotions of others. So if you have no control, you will not be able. You will just impulsively do your thing without considering others. Yeah. So just to give you a little example of course there's a very important link. Yeah, I would say it's super important. It might not be sufficient you still need to shape some of the skills to communicate well. You also need words, for example, and you need to choose your words wise. Otherwise, any control in the world will not help you. So there's more to it, but of course that's a very, very important part. Yes.
Absolutely. You meant that, just going to one of the questions which has come through from the Zoom audience, but you've partly referred to. The question was, can't we also assess social emotional skills in preschool?
Yeah.
And you've been doing it.
Yes. That's another study, a very interesting one. But yeah, that's of course possible and of course needed. Yes, it was already raised here, the question of the environments being very different, often also different ministries. So it's very important to understand what's happening there, how to make a transition happening that's actually beneficial, where you can build on the skills and you're not dumping them, trying to see these dips that we've seen also from 10 to 15-year-olds. So it's really important to understand really the whole life cycle. And we also heard a little bit about skills at work from some people here. And actually, I would say, this is why PIAC, for example, also assesses some of the skills, because they are really, really relevant for our success in work life. And learning also doesn't stop once we stop schools. So there's also a lot of research going on social and emotional skills of teachers, for example, which I would also highlight as extremely relevant. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's great. For the purposes of the logic of the seminar then, I think this is extremely important, that we need to pay more attention to the development of executive functions and creativity, particularly in the early stages, in order to develop their social and emotional skills, in order to improve the quality of their learning. And therefore, the high quality learning we are looking for is not going to happen if we don't pay attention to these, particularly in early years and in primary school. And also, as you rightly say, that the set of skills you've identified are the ones that employers keep going, this is actually what we want from children coming out of school, and so forth. All the rest of the history and bits of ancient science you've taught them is all terribly nice, but this is what we need in employers. That's absolutely great. I've just got one more question for you. When you were talking about the percentage of teachers who were involved in or charged with nurturing the social and emotional skills of children, this is a more nuanced question. I have 4 children who are older now, and they tortured the education system almost to the point of extinction. And 2 of the boys were regularly asked to leave their schools, and we had to find other ones. And in these schools, they had tutors who were responsible for the social and emotional well-being of the children, that clearly social and emotional well-being was an issue with 2 of my boys. The tutor's job was to apply the disciplinary system, which took them through various stages until they were permanently excluded. So you can say to a teacher, are you charged, do you have responsibility for social and emotional? But actually, how that's interpreted is really key, because in lots of schools it's been codified into a disciplinary process which is pointing children to the exit as opposed to actually dealing with any of those issues. Is there any way from your research to know actually what the teachers were up to?
Well, we know also from we don't have a specific insight on the views of the teachers of that sort.
Yeah.
But we know that in most of the curricula we have outlined different skills. So at least across the sites that I mentioned here, they are implemented as goals. So teachers, if they think about, okay, they should have those in mind. But yes, we don't have data yet that shows if they have that in mind, and often, yes, it might be the case that it's more seen as handling the problem, yes, instead of providing the solution, scaffolding until they have, or providing the support needed for them to grow social and emotionally, and not just keeping the rest centered on learning. It's also helping the child to grow. So I hope that we will get there, but yes, I also have doubts that we are there in all of the cases. Yeah.
It's my experience in Ireland, where we've been working with the National Educational Psychology Service, which has lots of educational psychologists in it. They're very frustrated because, generally speaking, their interaction with school is the school rings up and says, can you send a psychologist, I have a problem. And they're then handed this boy, and the teachers say, cure him, please. And you go, it doesn't work like that. There's a whole dynamic in the classroom that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think especially now after or during the COVID crisis, we actually saw how important the role of teacher is. And so they could have, or they have the potential to have this role to really help them solve problems, to view the perspective of the others, to really enrich the learning experience. But of course we cannot expect this. I also don't want to blame teachers. I mean, if for years we taught them how important academic achievement are, and they already feel they have all this content to deliver, and then all of a sudden we say like, well, and there's also social and emotional skills, please do that on top, and we don't help them how to do that.
Absolutely.
And they feel it's on top, and it cannot be embedded, or it cannot be part of, for example, teaching mathematics. Can actually be done in a way that puts an emphasis on curiosity, that is done in a collaborative way. I think we cannot expect teachers to just do it because we are telling them. We need to support them, and we've seen that some of the teachers did not receive the support needed in terms of training. But also there are other ways of supporting them. I mean, within like coaching, team teaching, and these things. So all of this is important to create really a community of learners, also for the teachers. We discussed this yesterday. So
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful example of what Dr. Vishan was saying, is that research of this kind should go back to reconceptualize what a teacher is. And then the first part of the support for the teacher is to help them with that reconceptualization, to go, we still want you to have great academic attainment, but what we're saying is you're not going to get it unless you understand your role differently, and then we will support you. No, that's absolutely brilliant. Let's go on to your second part. Thank you. Oh, sorry, yes.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for an exceptional presentation, really well done. This might be a very unfair question, but I suspect that you are working in a context where there are a reasonable amount of resources available. What messages, and this is probably intuitively, would you be able to give those of us that work in very constrained, low-income contexts where issues around the topics that you are investigating are exceptionally important, but we're working in very constrained context around, where the order of the day is high levels of material deprivation, high levels of exposure to violence, and so on. How does one go about thinking about managing issues around social and emotional skills?
Yes, of course that's a special challenge then, but there are different ways. I mean, of course, training and so on is very important, but you can also, for example, try to foster this kind of informal learning. I mean, that's also important for those countries that are more well off, but you can try to use, for example, the school principals if you are not able to really train everyone, or a key person of the personnel that should then have the role as a multiplicator in trying to, or even a school within a region as a multiplicator for learning, for fostering learning among this community. And we are also trying within the OECD actually to give countries, or not just countries, like every teacher, we have like a global platform now that that actually tries to provide examples of how this can be done. And when you have a mobile phone at least, or a mobile device, you might be able to get some inspiration from all over the world and to get some answers also. You can post questions, you can post answers. Of course, that's just one part, but there are different ways of trying to also deliver something that doesn't require like an intensive, cost-intensive training. Yeah.
I think that's a really important question that you've asked. And I'd like to come back to it during the seminar and us to spend some more time thinking about that, because I think it's key. I also noticed in the maps that there's no African participation at all. And that concerns me, but also makes me curious about that. Thank you very much indeed for that question. Hannah.
So now I will have to do again a little finger gymnastics. Let me just so I don't know, then it will go too far and I have to go back. I'm afraid of not handling the going back so well. Oh, yeah, there it was. So, as said, I will now talk about the global competencies, which actually, again, the question, why would we look at this? And the question now is, we've talked also about this already a little bit, is we have now, let me go back one slide. We have many threats today that are actually global threats. Yeah, when we talk about terrorism, when we talk about conflicts between states, when we talk about environmental challenges like climate change, they are actually global challenges. So to tackle them, we actually need global efforts, and we have the SDGs, of course. But these global efforts need to be built on active and empowered citizens. Someone also mentioned that already yesterday, and I was very glad to hear that, because that's actually true. How can we reach those global SDG goals if we are not having empowered citizens? So that was the key question, and we came up with a model, or PISA came up with a model that looks at 4 broad areas. We think it's important to be global competence, meaning that you have to examine the local, global, and also intercultural issues at hand. So you have to combine the different knowledges, but also critically analyze them to come up with really an informed opinion about an issue. Because today the issues are quite complex. It's also important to really understand and appreciate the perspectives of others and of deviating views that there are on these topics. We really have to recognize these perspectives and also behaviors. And I also need to be aware of my own behavior, of course, and how it deviates from those. then I need to be willing and able to engage in very open and also in appropriate and effective interactions across the different cultures. I need to understand that there are different norms of communicating, and I have to adapt to be effective. And also, of course, my behavior. And I also need to be willing to really take actions for the collective well-being, not to be self-centered, but to really think it's the duty of all of us to strive for well-being in our planet and for a sustainable development. And how did we measure that? Now again, okay. That was too quick. How did we measure that? Well, we had a test that directly tested the knowledge and cognitive skills of global competencies, but we also had self-reports on skills and attitudes. And again, we also collected contextual information from school leaders, teachers, and parents. This is just to give you an example of one of the cognitive items of the test. There's always an introduction. That one I will not go into detail, but it's about the raising sea level. It gives you like an introduction of a fictitious issue in a planet where there's a rising sea level due to carbonized waste. And then there will be different items. Normally to one of those scenarios, there are different items. Some of them are simple multiple choice, others are complex multiple choice. For example, here, where you are proposed, you need to create a movie, and then you have to answer, okay, what are the reactions and what are the purposes of that movie, and you have to answer all of these different questions correctly to get to score. And then there are also some examples where you have open response items. For example, here, if in the case of this fictitious change in climate, those inhabitants from this fictitious country have to move to another area, what are the challenges for moving to the new place? And then you can freely produce different challenges that you foresee, and those have been then coded by trained coders in each of the countries. All of this is embedded into the broader context of PISA 2018. Overall, over 500,000 students were surveyed, and it was a survey of almost 80 countries and economies. However, in this, that was just an option. Not everyone participated, but at least we had 27 full assessment, meaning also the cognitive test, and then 39 that only administered the self-reports. And Thailand was one of the full participants. And when we look now at the performance on the global competency test, then we actually see that some of the countries where we already know that they score high on math and science and so on are also scoring quite high on global competencies, like Singapore, for example, or Hong Kong, Chinese Taipei. But however, if we really look at what would be predicted when we look at science, math, and reading achievement, then we actually see also that there are important differences. It's not the case that if you score high on mathematics, you're also global competent. Because we see, for example, that Colombia, who was relatively low scoring in math and science, actually was not doing so badly on the global competency test. And another opposite example is Korea, who is normally quite well off when we talk about mathematics and so on. But then when we look at global competencies, they are doing less well than predicted. So it's not the same. It's not sufficient to teach our children math, reading, and science. They will not be competent in a global context. And when we look at the relationships of attitudes and disposition, we actually see that they predict the global competencies. So those that report they have greater respect for people from other cultures also score higher, that have a positive attitudes towards immigrants score higher, they can adapt cognitively, they are self-efficacious, they are aware of global issues, they have interest in learning about other cultures, and they also have the agency to act on the issues that they have identified, and they are aware of intercultural communication. All of this actually relates to the global competency test, and even if we control for important background characteristics. So, I already mentioned that it's very important that students are aware of global issues. And when we look at the data collected, of course, before COVID, then we see that students are quite aware of different issues. For example, equality issues between men and women, migration, climate change, cause of poverty, and even global pandemics. Yeah? Over half of the students were actually aware of that before COVID. We will have some new data soon, so let's see how that has developed after the COVID crisis. But we also see that before COVID, there was a huge variation. For example, we see that Hong Kong, there was 80% of the students were aware of public health issues, whereas in Saudi Arabia, it was like not even half. And we see, sorry, that was again too quick. Thailand was actually, Thailand was not doing so badly either with regard to the awareness. And what we also see is that parents are important. I already mentioned that for social and emotional skills. And again, we see that, of course, learning starts at home. And learning continues at home. It's not the case that once you enter school, you're off the job. Yeah? You still need to try the best to promote, and teachers need to help. As experts of pedagogies, they need to help the parents actually to do the job. So, because we see here, for example, that in those that also had a parents' assessment, that the global issues, the awareness of global issues relates to the awareness of global issues from the parents, even after controlling for important background characteristics. We also see differences between those top and bottom, those students from the top and bottom of the socioeconomic distribution. So those who are well off are actually normally more aware of global issues. But we see here a positive example. In Thailand, it's at least a little bit less. So still, it is an issue. There is this inequality, but at least it's a bit less. When we talk about student agency and taking actions, that's actually, I think, key. I mean, we can all be aware, but in the end, we need people who take actions. It's not important. It's not sufficient to just stop and say, like, well, I'm aware. We also need to do something about it. And there's we see here that actually almost 80% that say that it's very important for me to look after the environment, and I think I'm a citizen of the world. And when I see poor conditions, I feel the responsibility, but then more active things and being really having the feeling that I can do something about it, that's less the case. So that's actually would be key for really changing something in the world, to make them feel that, yes, actually, you can do something about it. And what we see, interestingly, is also that girls have a higher agency regarding these global issues. So they feel more inclined to say, like, okay, I can do something about it. But here, again, we see that the difference between girls and boys in Thailand is actually quite small. Yeah, it's non-significant. Then again, as I said, it's really important that students then also take action. And there are some forms that most of the students actually report they do, around 70, 50%. I reduce the energy at home, I keep myself informed, I regularly read websites and so on. But then to really participate actively, to do something that costs a little bit more, to participate in some activities that actually promote equality between men and women, for example, or to boycott something that would maybe hurt a little bit, that's less the case. Yeah, but that's, of course, very important. And, of course, I would like to highlight education is also key for creating
an environment or for enriching the learning experiences so that students can actually acquire those global competencies. Because what we see, for example, that if I see at my school that there is a discrimination, then I'm also less inclined to show respect towards people from other cultures. And that's, of course, I think we can understand that quite well. If the system actually says like, well, it's okay, then why should I think differently, you know? And then, interestingly, also, it's very important to provide different learning opportunities at school, and there are different ways of actually promoting global competencies. Most of the students actually say that they learned about different cultures, they learned about how to solve conflicts and so on. They also learned how to communicate with people from different backgrounds. But then more active ways of really analyzing global issues together with the classmates, having something more interactive where you really have to be confronted and to confront yourself with these different views and not just acknowledge them, that's less the case. Yeah. And really having like focused activities that promote these and that are not just like a byproduct of what's happening in school, that you see other cultures and so on, that's less the case. And what we see here, the number of learning activities also vary across countries. And again, I would like to highlight that in Thailand, it's around 7 to 8 on average. Whereas, for example, in France, Slovenia, and Hungary, students report around 4. Yeah, and that's actually important because we also see that the number of learning activities relate positively to students' attitudes, for example, to all of the different attitudes that we observe, to their interest in learning about other cultures, awareness of global issues, also agency, self-efficacy, perspective taking, and so on. So my key takeaways for today, for both of the parts of the session, are actually, it's really important to look beyond academic skills and to acknowledge that social and global aspects are part of learning and that we need to promote them. And to really ensure a holistic approach to education. Because only like this we can ensure that children strive and grow into active, successful, and responsible citizens, which is important. And then to understand that learning happens inside and also outside of school, where we need to team up with parents. They are important agents also of global learning and of social and emotional learning. And of course, our knowledge in this area is still not the same as for academic achievement, and it needs to catch up to be better able to guide policies and practices also in schools. And with this, thank you very much. And if there are any more questions, I'm happy to address those, and I'm looking forward to more discussions.
I thought I'd start with you because there were a number of Hong Kong features in that which were quite surprising, and I thought you might want to reflect on the whole, but in the light of what it was showing you there.
Actually, hello, can you hear me? Okay. Actually, I really appreciate the whole presentation about the social emotional well-being and also the global competency. I think those are very essential elements, particular for now, that we look into the students' well-being in a more comprehensive way. So this non-cognitive part really complement with the academic part that actually Hong Kong performed so well in the previous cycle of academic performance in terms of reading, math, science. And I'm also curious about the global competency in 2018, right? The data collect before 2019. So that will be quite interesting when we look into another cycle if we do have the global competency measure again. So it's a huge change in Hong Kong. And like East Asian countries always perform very well. We are doing good in academically, but feeling very bad in terms of the social emotional well-being. And having said that, I have questions about the well-being. Like in 2015, we do have a whole chapter, a whole volume, talk about well-being as a holistic concept. But I'm curious about why it turns into a more narrow definition of social emotional well-being. Like physical well-being is very important. Like the Thai boxing is so good. And then I find sticking to the conceptualization of well-being is very important. It includes the academic one that we measure already in OECD for the previous cycle. We have the physical one. We also have the social one, emotional one. All these are very consistent with the OECD transformative competency or the UNESCO transversal competency that involve the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and also some different kind of skills. I say it is a kind of transversal one that is more ultimate dimension. So one question is about why we change. I mean, OECD changed the study of well-being into a more narrow definition and then split it up into social emotional and then global. And in terms of nurturing the well-being of students, I think it's very important, like start from the teachers. If the well-being of teachers is not well taken care, it's very difficult for them to nurture our students. So Hong Kong I do shift my own research from PISA to some well-being study by WHO, HBSC, that really measure the holistic well-being, like the self-rated health, the physical and mental syndromes and life satisfaction. I think that is a very good to be considered in the direction of our educational reform, not just in Hong Kong, but also in Thailand. That's in some area, actually Thailand is doing pretty good. So it's somewhat like a kind of balance, and then we can have a very important common language. Like OECD, PISA is too powerful. Sometimes it will really lead the whole world to talk about the same things. That's why I'm thinking, if you focus back to the well-being, it would be very nice to have a more holistic education for all in basic education. So that's my reflection. Thank you very much for the amazing and inspiring presentation.
Thank you. Thank you also for this comment, because actually I agree. I mean, the thing is that, first of all, I want to highlight that as part of the volume that I'm leading, we will at least not just focus on analyzing academic achievement. That will, of course, always be the case, but also well-being this time. It's really in the focus. It's not like a specific book for those who are interested. We see it as part of the whole picture. Yeah, so I think actually it has grown in importance. I agree, of course, that we have to make sometimes some sacrifices, because you will know PISA is quite long. We cannot expect students to sit there for, we've seen it briefly on the slide, 2 hours and then more. We already try to distribute it and to cover as much content as possible, but there's a limit. What we normally offer is countries and economies to opt for certain options, and there is a well-being option, but then it depends, of course, of the individual country or economy to pick that one, and not everyone actually chose to have that. But there is something on physical health, on social health, like healthy relationships with peers and parents and so on. And we will try our best to cover it at least, how it relates, but we cannot cover it as a whole in the whole volume because there's already so much to cover, you know, and there's a limit. But there is a specific report also planned on teacher well-being, actually. Because some countries also have a teacher option, and they also measure some attitudes and so on from teachers and also well-being. So that would be of particular interest for you then, I guess.
Thank you very much indeed, Federico.
I was just wondering, in the global competence picture, it seemed that there was one aspect which is missing, which is values. It might be because PISA is such a huge machine that it's hard to find common shared values between 80 countries, but in a global competence perspective, it seems like that bit is missing. Has it been considered and then excluded? Has it been deemed like too controversial? Maybe in the context of a regional international survey, it's easier to talk about those topics because there's a more shared understanding of what's important or not. So if you could tell us something more about that.
Yeah, of course, values play a role in those things that we assessed, and you have some indirect parts of that in the measures that we have. But values is quite a construct that's very difficult to measure, I guess, across countries and to agree on. There are some more religious connotations in some others. The foundation is very different, so it's quite hard actually to come up with something globally then to say that would be the case for a global citizen. We have identified those attitudes that are relevant, and I think in those attitudes you have some of the more global aspects that are related to values, but we didn't directly touch the issue of values. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
I'm very interested in what Esther said there, and particularly about the physical, because in the work that we did internationally, the driving vision was always that the best learning happens when children are physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually engaged. And in fact, that's what took us to executive functions, because Adele Diamond, who's the great writer on executive functions, when I first read her, when Ricardo told me to go and read her, it was how she ends her analysis is by saying, if you want to develop executive functions, not just in children, but in the workplace, to fully engage people, they have to be physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually engaged simultaneously. And that what we focused on in the programs that we put into schools was, how do you do that in maths? How do you do that in science? How do you do that in all the different subjects that you have to teach for the curriculum, so that those things are happening? So I think those are absolutely key, and that one has that broad awareness and broad engagement of the children. And when you have it, it's amazing. The way they look is so different, and the way they're engaged and the levels of excitement that they bring to their learning. And the second part that I wanted to respond to is that Todd and I became involved with the creativity and critical thinking strand of OECD's work, because I got involved because I happened to know Stefan through other work. And I assumed when we arrived that we'd be talking about social and emotional skills, because I can't separate creativity and critical thinking from social and emotional skills. Those are absolutely linked to me. And it is the complexity and the scale of what you need to do in those subjects has led in OECD to these strands being developed. And over here we talk about creativity, over there we talk about social emotional skills and so forth. And I would say to OECD, you've done wonderful work in those areas, but now I think your challenge is, how can you bring those together into a set of measures which gives us that holistic something without losing the value of what you're doing already. Do you think that's possible to do?
Well, first of all, I would say that we are building on the work of our colleagues. For example, I forgot to mention that, but we had this impact meeting with our cities, and then we actually highlighted the work of Stefan, because we said, like, well, they developed a tool, they developed rubrics, they developed some lesson plans. There are some examples. We have work even before that from a colleague who's now working back in Spain, who published something on teachers as designers of learning environment, where he also provided some collections, like a compendium of different ideas for promoting these skills. So we try to highlight that, but as said, one big project cannot cover all of those different skills. But of course, we are enriching, for example, the other surveys. We managed to have now some of the skills, the social and emotional skills, in PISA, yeah? Which I think it's a really important merit of this project. But it's just simply impossible to have this one big survey that covers it all. If you also want to understand the context and so on, which I think actually it's key. I wouldn't just focus on assessing skills without having an understanding of the context. So you cannot do it all, unfortunately. But you can bring together the different. You can bring together the different pieces. Yeah. There's also excellent work in the directorate. For example, if we talk about well-being, the 21st Century Children Project, which actually has not a survey. Well, it has a policy survey, but it also draws on the evidence and really looks at the also physical well-being. And the last volume was very key. So really brings in the different pieces and provides the reader with an overall summary of the different insights that we have from the work. That's, I think, also important. And with regard to physical health and to health in general, actually there will also be soon a report from the survey on social and emotional skills, because we also looked at these things. I forgot to mention that, so maybe also something to look forward to then. Yeah.
Yes, please. Oh.
Thanks. Oh. Is it on? Yes. Testing. Great. Thanks, Hannah. You briefly, I have two questions. So you briefly mentioned that you were doing some work in preschool dimension, and so I'm reflecting on some of the conversation here that we're having about holistic learning, and my past experience working in early childhood education. That a lot of this work is already done in early childhood education, including quality assessments being built that we can assess social emotional learning. And it seems that we tend to just leave that behind once students make that transition into grade 3. So perhaps you could speak a little bit about your connection with the preschool study on social emotional education and how we can draw that out. And we working in the higher grades of K-12 can learn perhaps from those domains. And then the second question is you mentioned the blog, which I'm very excited to read more about. Maybe you could say a few more words about what the cities have actually done in response to it that could inspire some of our thinking and learning.
Yeah. Well, first of all, with regard to what they did, well, I think I mentioned already some of the examples. I can also say what we had a discussion also to prepare the current round for what they plan to do. And there are more examples. The ones that I've shown here was really what did they do in round 1, but this time we really try already to prepare them. So now you will collect the data. What is your plan? To already give them the mindset and to start the preparation, so it really has the impact. And we also ask them, how can we support you in this task, actually? And what they plan, for example, is to use it for looking at a curriculum reform, for example, in Delhi, because they have a value-based curriculum now, and they want to understand how this links to students' social and emotional skills. Then there is the example of, now I don't remember, was it Bogoda? No, it was a different site. I cannot remember who it was. But anyway, they try to shape programs that they apply. They have already programs, but they want to use the data to really shape that a little bit, set a different focus, refine it. Then we have some that work with a repertoire of different like videos and so on that they distribute on a website, then in their local language, because as I said, we have at the OECD something, but they want to do it locally. Again, raising awareness, like these campaigns, informing policymakers, of course, municipalities in some cases, yeah, like different things. And sorry, now the other question. Early childhood, yes. Yeah, we have this great study on 5 years old, but of course you cannot just simply apply the same measurement. It would be nice, but across different ages it needs to be age appropriate, so you cannot just copy it. But of course, because they used a bit more a play-based approach, and actually would like in this new project also to look more at game-based approaches, because this approach works on a large scale, but there have been new developments also beyond early childhood education where you can say like, well, it can be more fun, you know? I mean, we've seen some nice examples for executive functioning, and hey, can we do that maybe also for social and emotional skills? And this new project will actually look at that, and if countries are interested in exploring that more, also develop some prototypes to be tested. And then hopefully in the future there will be a full-blown large-scale survey. But yeah, it takes some time. As you have seen from the timelines, it always takes some time to prepare that properly. Yeah.
That's great. The
Paul,
yes.
just one thing that I think it didn't come up yet, but it's I think very relevant to the audience, is that PISA is going to integrate in 2022 creative thinking. So that's maybe you can tell us a little bit about how many countries, what's expected of that, and maybe if there's any connection to the work that Seri did on this topic, which back in the days was thought to really inform what would be taken on by PISA.
Yeah, I mean, we have always, I forgot to mention that unfortunately we will not have data on global competencies, but creative thinking, because in every round you have like these more exploratory work where not everyone is participating, but that brings new insights, and that's not part of the main PISA. And that will be creative thinking, yes, and that was very much inspired by the work going on in Syria. But of course not everyone will participate, and the report will come out slightly after ours. Ours will be published, the main PISA, in December this year, and that one will be published then in March, I think, next year. And there you can read all about it, but it's not my topic of expertise, I have to be honest, that I'm not that involved in that part of our work. We are, of course, discussing it every here and then, but I'm not the author, and I don't want to say anything wrong. But yeah.
I was interested in what you were saying at the end before about the next stage was looking at how you can do some more fun assessments, if you see what I mean. In the survey which Federico did of digital assessments which were available, I think I was disappointed by how many have simply digitized questionnaires. And of course it makes the administration of the thing easier because the scoring's done automatically and various other things like that. But what I like about Yellow Red is it's one of the few that I've come across that's really beginning to explore the potential of digital technology to reinvent how one assesses, if you see what I mean. And you're saying you will look at that a bit.
Yes. I think sometimes I'm a researcher myself, but sometimes research is a bit slower than maybe sometimes also private sector, and there you can sometimes see like fun games already being developed. Yeah. But of course not at a large scale and not within like sometimes lacking a little bit the conceptual underpinning. But actually we will try to have an open mind. Open-mindedness is also important in research. We will look at all these different approaches, and we also reach out to companies, to private companies, just to get a full picture of what is out there and what can be done in this new project. So that's a little bit the idea. But yes, I agree that often it's a bit disappointing that in the end it's just a digitalization of the questionnaire. That's not the idea. That's not when we talk about game-based assessment. That's really, and playfulness in assessment, that's really not what we're talking about. I mean, paper pencils still exist also in PISA, but it's getting less and less, and also in other surveys. So we already have like this digitalized questionnaires.
Yes.
That's not what we mean by this new approach. No.
That's great. And I think that's highly relevant to this direction of this seminar, which is towards what needs, here is some great assessment tools that we're looking at, which are really rigorous and well thought through, but where should we be going next? And maybe for EEF, to work with international partners to say, how can we really harness digital technology to make assessment, well, just more fun to begin with for everybody, but actually to be able to test more deeply and more interestingly what's going on in children's minds.
And also more adaptive. I mean, that's also a great advantage. You don't need to post them all the questions, because you can really adapt those questions that will give you the maximum of information.
Yeah.
So, tune to their level of skill in that sense. So,
we have are there any more questions from out in the floor? You're all very quiet. You're thinking deeply, I suspect. Yes, please.
Hi, all. I'm a science teacher from Thailand. So it's like I have been teaching like for 6 or 7 years. So I went to like the Thai educational system like for like 20 years, and you raised the point about the globalization competency that I have never been touched or like think about that as well since like throughout my life. But I think it's really good point to your international survey that can raise the point about the globalization. And I also think about the connection between the executive function and also the creativity that is linked together, as the Paul mentioned. And I think the executive function is I would say the fundamental root that can when we can build the executive function since the students were very young, like a kindergarten student, a primary student, it can be like a good sign for develop the fundamental skill, and it's also like can improve the creativity skill as well. It's maybe the creativity is the top of the competency skill of the student. It might be hard to measure. If the student can build the base, the good base from the executive function, it might be good for them. And I think from the question from the yesterday that some teacher or some the audience asked about what can we build the professional development to build the teacher to have a good creativity, is maybe like I think if we can build since like when it's fundamental from the executive function, is maybe good for them. And also for the Thai educational system, we try to develop from the news that I heard that we try to develop the competency-based curriculum, but for now it's still like being processed, and it may be like launched for like next 2 or 3 years from now.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's great to have real live teachers in here, isn't it? Yes, because that's what it's all about. Yes. We have a few more minutes before we go to the coffee break, and I'd like to go back to your question, which is looking in particular at the social emotional skills and the problems that exist in low-income countries with significant recent histories of violence. And I was wondering whether any of our international participants might give some advice as well as to how one can address these in school. Would you like to start, Hester? Well, just the context. A lot of the social emotional skills research that Hannah did tended to be relatively better off countries, and you were asking from the context of South Africa, with children coming in with significant social and emotional issues, if you see what I mean, because of the broader social context, because of poverty and other things like that. How do schools go around dealing with problems like that?
Okay, I think based on my research on the WHO HBSC, there's actually a serious health inequity in terms of social and economic status. So it's more likely that the no social income, social social and economic status used to be measured by education, occupation, and income. For those from lower SES, they tend to have lower life satisfaction, lower self-rated health, more emotional problem, and more physical problem. So the foundation is that we must provide the material resources, the basic one, for every student before they get to school, like free meal, free breakfast. So those are very foundation that they are physically they are ready to learn. Otherwise, if they are very hungry, how can they learn? And also, in terms of the bullying, is it some problem like serious violence in school? Is that right? So actually, bullying is serious problem. I think not just the physical bullying, but also the cyber bullying in this digital world. And what we are doing in Hong Kong in my school-based intervention is that we try to promote some kind of mindfulness practice so that they can take care of themselves. Like we have a particular mindfulness corner within the classroom, and then we create a particular mindfulness room for those who really have strong emotion, so that they can get into the room we have educational psychologists or social workers to help them to calm down, and then they even have a regular daily mindfulness sitting meditation, maybe just 3 minutes before they start the class. And then in our intervention school, we also have mindful eating. 10 minutes, no talking, no silence, and then really appreciate the food. That is very precious. So there's so many people contribute to the vegetables and to the growing of the rice and to, that school is a kind of vegetarian school, so we don't have meat. And then, so we try to build up these tiny little things in the daily life of the school, so that the most students can keep calm before they start the class, eat well. So I think that is very basic. Sometimes I feel it's a kind of luxury for some disadvantaged countries, and so the world have the responsibility to provide that basic support. So you can't use $1 or $2 to survive in one day. So I think this is the global issue that we should take care of. Not just...
Absolutely. I think all your suggestions are really good. And I was very struck with, when I was doing some work in India, that the Indian government took on this thing that nutrition is key to learning. You've got to be fed. And so it decided that lunch would be served to every primary school child. Within a short period of time, they had to set this up. And that meant 600 million lunches every day had to be conjured out of somewhere, right? And after a couple of years, I was back in India and talking to some people in the education system and said, what have you been doing for the last 2 years? And they go, working out how to generate 600 million lunches. And the whole system was entirely convulsed. Nothing else happened whilst they worked out how they were going to do this. Now, I would think from your response, your heart was probably sinking, thinking, all the solutions involve new resources, and the problem is that it's a vicious cycle of being a poor country, that you're a poor country and then the solutions are to spend more money.
Thanks, and thank you for the response. And indeed, that is the low-hanging fruit. But the thing with low-hanging fruit, they're the sweetest and usually provide the most nutrition, so to speak. So in South Africa, those types of programs are certainly implemented and do work.
Yeah.
But the other issue that is perhaps not very contextually relevant within our current context are the issues around how does this work play out within traditional sense of intergenerational oppression. So the sad part of it is that while colonialism was experienced as a violent act, and it was experienced as a destruction of the self, I think what was less clear was that the destruction of the self would carry across generations and would manifest themselves in children. So within the African context, you can choose which one you want. And then I think in Asia there are quite a few countries as well that are experiencing that sense of intergenerational oppression, intergenerational destruction of the self. And how do we find a way beyond the low-hanging fruit to be able to develop issues around the sense of self that will then play out into the different other aspects of life. And I think those are the types of things that we are struggling with at the moment.
Absolutely.
And intuitively we try to use data and make sense of how data can improve the lives of children. So we have our nutritional programs that work, but because colonialism is experienced as a sense of violence, or as a sense of vertical violence, the result is that within South African communities, and South Africa happens to be one of the richer countries in Africa, we are experiencing the vertical violence, and unfortunately women and children in South Africa, the most vulnerable groups, are at the receiving end of that. And we need to think about how we make sense of issues around child well-being, academic performance, socio-emotional health, and so on from these perspectives. And I think it's similar in many other countries in Asia, certainly countries in South America, and pretty much every country in Africa. My understanding is that Thailand was able to avoid that.
But just to say that just spending more money is also not the answer, it's how you spend it. So it's not that easy. That's also what the data shows, actually. And also, I would say that that right now we also need to be aware that schools are delivering education within a context. And often there is an unknown strength also in the broader context. And that can mean different things, in different environments. Working with parents, for example, but maybe they're also social providers and so on. And often schools, they could have or have the potential to have a key role in connecting these different services that are available and to really create these hubs of learning and well-being to be like this point that actually connects these different services, but often this is not happening because we are working in our silos, they are administered by different ministries and so on. So sometimes the answer is also to look what is already there and to build on that one and not to come up with just something new, like a new program or whatever. And of course for violence and for, often it happens also because we are under enormous stress. We don't have the ways of communicating. So again, social-emotional skills are important. I need to know how to communicate. I need to understand the other. Some students might not even be aware that they do harmful things, especially if we talk about softer forms of violence like bullying and these kinds of things. And there need to be they need to have the tools, the awareness that this is harmful. And actually, even of course the magnitude varies, but a lot of countries these days are really, really concerned that after the COVID crisis, after often being locked in, not being able to get rid of your energy, of connecting to others, of being isolated. In a lot of countries you have these reports that there's a burst in violence and towards teachers, but also towards peers. And we will see what the data says, but we will also look at that in PISA, and we also have something on school safety, also for that reason, that also looks at gun violence, which might not be such a big issue or a similar big issue across countries, but it will actually be covered. And other forms of violence, such as cyberbullying as well, because yes, there is a big preoccupation actually in a lot of countries and economies after the crisis.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
So your major concern is about the intergenerational oppression, right? The parents. So my experience that we have very poor school in Hong Kong, but then we did have some parent education program, and then we prepare really canned food. Whenever they come to the parent education program, we do have this as a kind of souvenir donated by NGO. And then every parents, actually I feel parents could be very caring for their kids if they have the ability and the resources. So I think school is a good base to attract those parents and then provide proper incentives that they really need in their daily life. And then we start to talk about nonviolence communication. We have this particular program for nonviolence communication, how to take care of your kids, how to talk to them. It's not just physical, it's really communicative one that we can do better as a parent. And then they can learn. Actually, this is not a kind of problem of basic education, it's adult education's issue. But the parents' education is a good point of entry that I think it could do a little bit by a little bit from the school, and then maybe next time when we do the donation, we can donate some really daily life things to school level so that they can start to promote this kind of caring parenting, mindful parenting, non-violence parenting. That could be a very good start. And my own research my PhD studies actually is parental involvement in children's education. That works. But if you don't do anything, there's social inequality always there. But the parents is a good point of entry to help. And they are caring when they know the skills, then when they have the resources. That is very, very important. And I would love to help if there's anything I can do.
Yeah. Also, I would say, coming back to your point, actually also with regard to parental involvement, early childhood education is also maybe doing a better job there. Actually, my PhD is on early childhood education. I looked at quality aspects. And there's actually the work with parents is like an essential part. And I think we sometimes feel like, okay, now they are growing up, they are getting more independent. Yeah, parents are out of duty, so to say, but actually that's not the case. We need to continue the work beyond primary schools, and I think that's key, and I think there's early childhood education, again, maybe putting a greater emphasis than in other sectors, yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Esther. I certainly agree that parents are absolutely key. But getting the right parents in the room is very, very complicated. In many of the countries that we're working in, Thailand is one, you have this phenomenon of thousands of very small schools. Right? And government ministers, on the whole, like closing down very small schools. They think they're inefficient, they don't provide good services. And local communities are incredibly resistant to this. And the reason is that in many locations, the school is the only presence of government other than the police. And the police don't have quite the same nice relationship with the community, and the school does. And that's a plus, right? Because it is a place that discussions can take place. But a lot of the parents you want to really engage in these conversations are suspicious of schools because they do see it as being a front for the government, right? And therefore the extent to which they're willing to engage in a positive conversation like you recommend, which I think is absolutely key, has got to be handled very carefully so that they feel that it is a place they will be listened to, that will understand them and will not lecture them or punish them, which is what many of those parents' experience of school up until then has been. But at that note, thank you so much, Hannah, for a really fascinating morning.
Thank you.
Let's take a break and let's reconvene at 11:20. Thank you very much for raising those points. you. I'm delighted to introduce Andrea.
I think it's almost on there, because I can see it over here. So while they're getting the presentation, I'm Andrea Nette, and I'm the director of IEA Amsterdam. Yeah. Also not on. Oh. I will get closer. Okay, this is really close. Yay, there it is. So for those who didn't actually hear me, I'm Andrea Nette, I'm the director of IEA Amsterdam, and I'm really happy to be here with you all. So first of all, I want to thank EEF for this invitation to IEA. I've learned a lot in the last 2 days. It's been very valuable meetings and a very valuable presentations, and I hope I can give you also some food for thought. So today I will tell you something about our studies. So TIMSS, Pearls, ICCS, and beyond. Let's see what the beyond is. Okay, so I will try if this works without it going out. Yay, great. So this is the contents of the presentation. As you can see, I will give you a brief introduction to IEA and to all the colleagues that work on it. I will give you a structure and overview of the IEA studies. Then I will introduce TIMSS, and then we'll have a lunch break. And afterwards, I will go on and I will introduce Pearls, ICCS, all the materials that Pearls, ICCS, and TIMSS entail, and I will give you some overview of the other IEA studies and other activities. So I think we'll have discussions and questions afterwards, after the first break, or before the first break. But if you have anything in between, just raise your hand. I mean, we're a really small group, so don't feel shy to ask anything in between also. So I will start with an introduction of IEA. So this is actually our mission statement, which was created by the members and the staff and the partners, directed by the new chair that we have at IEA. So it says, IEA conducts large-scale studies to better understand education practices, processes, and policies in order to improve quality teaching and learning within and across systems of education. And in everything we do, we try to remember this mission statement, and we try to make sure we live by it. So actually, IEA was founded in 1958 by the UNESCO Institute for Education in Hamburg, Germany. So we exist for a long time already. And our studies are based on very diverse topics, including mathematics, science, reading, civic and citizenship education, and early childhood and teacher education also. We are an NGO, and we have more than 60 countries or member institutions. So here you can see the list of our members currently. As you can see, we have Thailand on there also. And in Thailand, our member is actually the Office of the Education Council. And we learned yesterday that, or Monday, that they actually are part of IEA for the last 50 years already. So that's a very long tradition in IEA studies. Oh, it works so well. So this is actually our organizational structure, and I only go through it very, very quickly. But the IEA General Assembly is our central decision-making body of IEA, and that's actually our countries. So the countries are the most important. We join a meeting with them every year to set the tasks for the coming year, and we actually are the ones that execute what they ask us to execute. So oh, I did it. But now I'm not even touching it. Oh, it's back. Oh, they're doing it, I think. Yeah, they're doing it. Thank you. So from our members, we have a chair being elected, which is currently Cherry Rocher. We have 6 countries that are representing the GA throughout the year, because we only meet once a year. Sometimes something happens within the year. So we have representatives for questions like that. Well, now I really didn't do anything. Oh, they're doing it again. Yeah. Yay. And we have the directors of IEA, which are the ones that execute the tasks. And we actually have 2 offices. So we have an office in Amsterdam, which I'm the director of, and we also have an office in Hamburg. The office in Amsterdam is really small. We only have about 25 people. The office in Hamburg is really, really big. They have about 180 people. And to celebrate somewhat the end of the pandemic, at least we were allowed to travel again. We met our colleagues in Hamburg who we hadn't seen in 2 years. And we went on a boat trip, which was really, really great. So we were really happy to see each other again, except on like the little screen throughout the past 2 years. It's going to be like a... No. Yeah, no. I also don't know if I'm just not touching this correctly. It's really scary. Let's try. Yay, here we are. So as a research organization, all the data from the IEA studies are or will become available open access. So everything's open access, everybody can get everything online. And we encourage them, of course, everybody to use them. Oh, we got a new one. Thank you. Let's see if this works. So we're also actively supportive secondary analysis with activities like our biannual research conference and also publishing several publications to give more visibility to the data and findings for variety of audiences. You can see here on the screen that the first one is our IEA Research for Education series that is mostly targeted at researchers. The second one is our IEA Research for Educators. Both are published by Springer. And the second one is teachers, mostly focused on teachers. The third one is our compass briefs, which is for policymakers, explaining the results in our studies. The third one is also for teachers, the IEA Teacher Snippets we just created not so long ago. And the third one is our journal together with ETS, which is also mostly targeted at researchers. And of course, IEA publishes this, but it undergoes review procedures to ensure the high quality by our publications and editorial committee. So I will give you some structure about our IEA studies. So first of all, what's most important is that IEA studies are a joint venture with the countries. In other words, countries are part of determining the research agenda and the study framework together with all the other countries and the respective international study center. As you can see here on the screen, we have a study center, Boston College, which oversees TIMS and Pearls. We have ACER that oversees ICCS, and IEA actually does ILS ourselves. So the collaboration with the partners and the countries is really core of what we do. It's a core value, and every country has an equal voice. And then, of course, we have independent researchers doing quality control. So, for instance, we have sampling referees, we have RTI, Statistics Canada, overviewing all the sampling procedures. The technical details are overviewed by our technical advisory group. And as I said before, publications are overviewed by our PEC committee. Yay. So in every country, national research centers are nominated and are responsible for coordinating all the aspects of the study within the country. So NRCs are actually the same thing as NPMs in PISA. We just call them differently. So these NRCs, they played a big role in IEA studies, and they are a country's main contact for IEA. And they are responsible for the implementation of the study in the country, including the coordination of all tasks, but also they hire the staff. And as you can see, they have to hire a data manager, an IT coordinator, and of course, translator and translation reviewers. So of course, these NRCs, conduct the study in the country, but they are also responsible for making it a national study. Of course, it's an international study, but they are definitely, for instance, in the sampling frame, but also in adding extra questions to a questionnaire. There are very much possibilities on a national level. And I think you know this from PISA, but also TIMSS and Pearls. It's like a moving train. So it's really important that you know beforehand, before you actually enter a study, what it is that you want to get out of it. Just to make sure that you're not in the field test already by the time you figure out what your national questions will be, or that you figure out, oh, maybe it would be nice to oversample this type of student population or this particular reason. Because everything goes really, really quick. Even though you think Pearls has a 5-year cycle, those 5 years go quick. So you have to know beforehand already what you will actually do with the study and what you intend with the outcomes of it. So that's why I also think that this seminar is really, really good, that you're having it, that you're actually thinking about what is it that my country needs and what is the best way of getting to that result. So there are several steps in an IEA study, and of course the National Research Coordinator is part of every step in it. So all of these steps, oh, I didn't do that. Yeah. So as you can see, the framework and instrument development is being done together with the study center and the NRCs and the countries, but everything is created in English. So then translation and adaptation and the verification of materials is a really long process, just to make sure that everything is on the same level, of course. Then we do the study design, sampling and drafting of the procedures and the guidelines. Then we field test everything. The field test is about 50 schools per country in a regular country. Then you do the data entry, processing, and coding for the field test. Coding is still necessary, although of course we have automatic coding also, but there are always open-ended questions that need hand coding. Then finalizing of the study framework, the instruments and the procedures, and then you're ready to collect data for the main study. And then the most important part, the data analysis and the reporting. The reporting is of course done internationally, where you get an international report, but most countries also want to have their own national reports on the day of the release. So as you can see, it's a whole process, and it builds national capacity for implementing national assessments also. So IEA has a quite unique study design. Because we have a curriculum model that ensures the relevance for policymakers and practitioners. So first of all, IEA studies are grade-based. So that's the difference between PISA. PISA is age-based, so that means that they test 15-year-olds. We are grade-based, which means that we test either grade 4 or grade 8 students, depending on the study. Which means also that you have a direct link with the teachers. Because you actually test the whole classroom, the whole grade 4, with the teacher of either the topic or the classroom teacher. So first of all, our curriculum model, so you have the intended curriculum. So that's the curriculum that policymakers are actually aiming for. That's the one that they came up with. And that's set by the ministry on a national level. But then, of course, you have the implemented curriculum. So that's actually what is happening in the schools. So it's what teachers are teaching and what principals want to be taught in their schools also. So this is, the implemented curriculum is actually being assessed by our questionnaires. And then you have the attained curriculum, so what is actually achieved, so what the students can actually do. So IEA really strives in achieving the consistency between the instruction and the assessment and the testing. So what do we do for sampling? So for IEA studies, the schools are sampled. And within the schools, 1 or 2 classrooms are chosen. The students in the classroom are tested, and they fill out a background questionnaire also. And then their school principals and teachers are also getting background questionnaires. And for the grade 4 students, the parents of the assessed students are getting a background questionnaire as well. Okay, so what have we done in the last 60 years? So we started actually already in the 1960s with the first IEA studies that evaluated mathematics and science, reading and writing performance, or reading and writing performance. Yeah, exactly. So as you can imagine, conducting a study in the 1960s is very, very different from conducting a study currently. So we moved up. So since the year 2000, we began implementing TIMS every 4 years and PEARLS every 5 years to see actually differences in the performance across time. So that was the time when we started our trend studies. And built on those 2 previous studies, we also did civic education. So the first cycle of ICCS was actually conducted in 2009. And that's now implemented every 5 years. And then all the computers came and all the smartphones. So we started with our ICILS study, which is informational literacy. And that first cycle was conducted in 2019, and then every 5 years also. So what are our current trend studies? So these are our 4 big studies that we have currently. We have TIMS since 1995, PEARLS since 2001, ICCS since 2009, and ICILS since 2013. So mathematics, science, reading literacy, civic and citizenship education, and computer and information literacy. Those 4. And they're actually trend studies. So that means our definition of trend, if you want to measure change, don't change the measure. So you are somewhat stuck to what you have done before, because you can't make everything all of a sudden very different. So we saw before already, of course, our studies are monitoring progress towards the SDGs. And you can have an overview over here. So yeah, I can just let you read this also, but our studies are recognized as international standards that can be used to measure progress towards achieving these different goals. So for instance, ICCS is recognized as a global citizenship for 4.7, and personal TIMS are across different SDGs. ICILS is SDG 4.4. So what are benefits of joining an IEA study? So unfortunately, IEA studies don't lead to easy answers. Educational problems are really complex. So we can't in one study come up with all the answers, but they do contribute to the body of knowledge of how educational systems actually work and can optimize the conditions for teaching and learning. So countries are able to compare their students' achievement to achievement of students of other countries and can learn from each other. And that's the most important thing, that you actually learn from each other. You can learn from any other country that is out there. Somehow everybody in Europe looks at Finland for everything. That's fine, Finland is doing great, but you can't only learn from Finland, you can really learn from all the other countries also. That's something that we struggled with during the Corona times, where we weren't able to meet each other. Because our NRC meetings and our General Assembly meeting, that's really where you get most of the knowledge. You talk to each other, you see what everybody else is doing, you learn from each other. So we were really struggling, because you don't learn if you look at each other at the little screen and only do the basics and get the basic information. So we're really happy that we're back with in-person meetings. We just, in the last 3 weeks, had all the meetings for all the 3 studies, so we've been traveling a lot. But we're really happy to see each other again and to learn from each other. Okay, I will not do this, because I will go into TIMS before we go to lunch. So TIMS is our longest running study and is the IEA's flagship study, directed by the International Study Center at Boston College. So what do we do for TIMS? We test, it's conducted every 4 years, and we test grade 4 and grade 8. So grade 4 are students from about 10 years old. Grade 8 is about 14 years old. So as I said, we study grades, which means that a lot of countries participate both in grade 4 and in grade 8, so that you have a cohort longitudinal study, so that you test those both grades. If you're wondering, you can see how a grade relates to another grade per country using the ISCAT levels. I think you must be aware of those. So it collects rich contextual data for students, teachers, parents, and schools on factors that affect learning. And we started in 1995. That means that now currently we're in the field test or in the main test for 2023. So we have 28 years of trends coming up. It's quite exciting. And this is our design for TIMSS. So we sample a minimum of 150 schools and 4,000 students per grade. Of course, that differs a lot per country. We have countries that stick to that minimum, like the Netherlands, because we're quite small. We have smaller countries that do census, so that test all the students in grade 4, or all the students that they have in grade 8, for instance. We also have the United States that oversamples certain states or can oversample certain cities. That really depends on your own needs also. That's why we have the minimum. That's the minimum to actually say something about a country or an educational entity. But then it really depends on your own questions, national questions that you want to ask. We have a very strong, very critical sampling referee. So that means that you have to be able to show us a full list of schools. So for instance, it's not allowed to say, okay, I will join with this country, but only those schools, or only that region, or only, it has to be all the students in the whole country or in the whole city actually have the same chance of getting sampled to participate. So you can't just pick the ones that you like best or you think will do best. So they're quite strict, and we need to have that because we have, of course, our quality control measures in place. Then for the instruments, I said this a bit before already, we have a student assessments on mathematics and science, and then we have the content questionnaires. The parent questionnaire is only for grade 4. And we have a curriculum questionnaire, which is filled out by the NRC or somebody in the country, and that, in the end, turns out an encyclopedia, which is a very rich instrument to interpret the results that come out. So that's really good. So our assessment consists of 14 mathematics blocks, 14 science block. We have a new group adaptive design. I will tell you a bit about more later. And we have both multiple choice and constructed response items, so both closed and open items. So we have the blocks. I don't know exactly, Katie might know how many items we have. I was thinking we have a total of like 800 or something within those blocks, and then they move around in the assessment. So this is our framework for the TIMSS assessment for both grade 4 and grade 8. So per grade there are 3 content domains and 3 cognitive domains. And the cognitive domains are the same for grade 4 and for grade 8, so they are knowing, applying, and reasoning. And then for measuring students' mathematics achievement across the different subject matters, the content domain, and the thinking processes, the cognitive domain. So the content domains for grade 4 are numbers, measurement, and geometry data. And you have, for grade 8, numbers, algebra, geometry, and data and probability. And then you can see for the science achievement, the content domains are life science, physical science, and earth science. And for grade 8 are biology, chemistry, physics, and earth science. And then we have our group adaptive design, which is now introduced in 2023 for the first time. which includes items of 3 difficulties levels. So we have easy, medium, and difficult. And for each subject, a student will be assigned a block of easy and a block of medium items, or a block of medium and a block of difficult items. All countries will take all the items, but higher performing countries that have higher proportion of students taking more difficult item blocks, and countries that perform less well can have higher proportions of students taking less difficult item blocks. So we actually we're struggling a bit with the number of countries we have. So Pearls and TIMS are growing, which is great. We have more and more countries coming in. The problem with that is that the level of achievement of those countries really, really differ. So that means that you have countries that are performing really at a high level, but you also have more developing countries that are at a lower level of achievement. And giving all these students the same items can make it the case that the lower achieving students are getting really frustrated because they can't answer the questions. But also for the higher achieving students, it's not interesting anymore because they know all the answers already. It's just too easy. So to make sure that the level of the test matches more with the level of the ability, we came up with this group adaptive design to actually make it more targeted for the students, for the test taker. So the goal is to have a better match between the assessment difficulty and the student achievement in each of the countries. So it's not a student adaptive design. So it's not on the student level, but it's really on the group level. So we're doing it now in TIMS. We've started it in Pearls already, and with Pearls it really, really worked very well. So that's great. Students are much more motivated if they get a test that is actually up to their level. Okay, and then I will go through all the different questionnaires that we have. So first of all, this is the national level. So there are 5 broad policies covered in the national questionnaire and then in the TIMS encyclopedia also. So for instance, national and community context, organization and structure of the educational system, demographic and resources, and also teacher education, of course. Then for the home questionnaire, they entail questions, for instance, like home resources for learning, languages spoken at home by the parents, but also by their siblings, early reading, basic math and science activities that are done in the home, and also parents' perceptions of their child's school and education. So that's really interesting. Parents can give a very good view on what is actually happening. And it can also be very culturally different. So at one point, for instance, so I'm from Dutch, I'm from the Netherlands. At one point we had a question for the first time asking what a parent expected their child to achieve. So if it would only be it would be vocational training, for instance, or university or PhD level. And it was really funny that all the Asian countries, they answered that like 90% of the parents said, yeah, my child will do university. They were all very set on it. And the Netherlands was the actual opposite. So we had like 10% saying they will go to university. It's a very, so I'm not 100% sure where that comes from. I think in the Netherlands it's more the case, well, they have to like sport also, and they have to do all these other things next to academic achievement. It can also be the case that we just don't strive that high, which is not really a really good thing. I don't know what it is, but it's quite an interesting result. So then, of course, we have a principal questionnaire that gives you characters of where the school is, what the school has for resources, and also the school climate, for instance, discipline and safety, and bullying also what we heard before already. So then we have a classroom questionnaire for the teacher to fill out about the teacher education, professional development, teacher attitudes also, and class characteristics, and of course instructional activities and strategies. Also, use of technology has really become really important now, and the challenges that are faced by teachers. And then student attitudes in the questionnaire for the students. So how do they actually feel about their aspects of life and how they feel about school, the motivation and the attitudes toward mathematics and science, also the school environment, and of course bullying is also one in there. So we have in our questionnaires a lot of topics about well-being. And then I'm going to go into some results for TIMSS 2019. And it's TIMSS 2019, right? Before pandemic happened. So first of all, we saw very positive long-term trends in both mathematics and science, in both 4th and 8th grade. So the trend is that the achievement is actually on the rise since 1995, which is great. So, however, there are some short-term trends that show some declines. So we'll figure out what happens in 2023 if we see that going down again, or if it maybe goes up a bit. And of course, there are gender differences. So worryingly, in mathematics, we observed gender equity has eroded in the short term from 2015 to 2019 for mathematics in the 4th grade, where boys achieved a higher score on average in almost half of the countries, compared to around a third of the countries in 2015. So that's not a good thing. However, in science, there were more countries in which girls had higher achievement compared to boys than countries where boys achieved higher than girls. And this is great because this is a very different, this is a fast contrast to the first cycle of 1995, where no countries actually saw girls achieve higher than boys. So girls are catching up, which is a good thing for science. And then we see that more professional development is needed in the use of technology in schools for the teachers. So even before the pandemic, over 70% of the grade 8 students were taught by teachers, already indicating a need for more future professional development towards integrating technology into mathematics and science instruction. And then for the student attitudes, TIMSS 2019 observed a positive correlation between students who are confident and liking the subject and their achievement scores. And the percentage of students that reported not liking mathematics doubled from 4th to 8th grade internationally across countries. So there seems to be some work to do there. I think we all know this correlation. Students who are confident, who have a positive attitude, achieve better, and it's like a little circle going around. So we have to really try to get students engaged in both mathematics and science. And then the student bullying that came up here before already, that's really a cause for concern. So on average, about 1/3 of both 4th grade and 8th grade students reported experience in bullying, either about weekly or about monthly. And this is, of course, strongly related to achievement, where students have considerably lower scores than students who reported never or almost never experienced bullying. We even wrote a compass brief about this to also inform the policymakers about this subject. It's just been released, and it dives into the data on bullying a bit further. Specifically, with advances in technology, cyberbullying is even becoming a bigger problem and a big obstacle also for the education world. So how can we monitor progress using TIMSS? Besides the international report, there is also a report released together with UNESCO on how TIMSS helps countries to monitor global education goals. This is all freely accessible on the IEA website, probably also on the UNESCO website. Positively, a high percentage of TIMSS countries' students are reaching the minimum proficiency in both subjects and in both grades. So that's good news. So then what are the innovations in TIMSS 2023? We have a lot. I will go over it a bit. So first of all, the environmental awareness scales. Everybody is currently aware that environment is a big topic. So for the last cycle of TIMSS, Boston College constructed environmental awareness ad hoc scales based on several topics, including conservation, ecosystems, pollution, climate change, and cycles in nature. And these were added to the TIMSS 2019 International Database and the IEA IDB Analyzer and can be used by everybody. A report was released to actually summarize the results. Different countries appear to have different strengths, as you can see. And it's mostly important not to only have good intentions, but also to have the knowledge. So it's not enough to help the environment, to want to help the environment, but if you don't know the science behind it, you might not do the right thing. So there's also more secondary analysis coming on these scales. But for 2023, this scale has actually been expanded on as we have launched an expert group. And our new 2023 is also including new content questionnaires item to address these environmental attitudes and behaviors. This will include examples, questions like students will be asked how often they reuse materials, or parents will be asked how often they engage in activities with their child to promote environmental responsibility, for instance. And then we, in 2023, are also have to do something with the changing world. So computer-based assessment is giving us new challenges and new avenues of research, but also new challenges. So TIMSS 2019 began the transition to conducting the assessment in ePIL's digital format, coming from the paper-based format, of course. Oh, I'm taking too much time. And now digital assessments are the standard in both TIMSS and PEARLS, and they can improve efficiencies from a paper-based alternative. But they can also include some challenges, like the item development is much more challenging for us, much more time-consuming, much more expensive. It has a much higher time pace and demands on capacity, professionalism and equipment from both our side, but also from the NRC side. But it gives you new opportunities also. So one of the opportunities with the digital is that we have our PSIs now. So our problem-solving and inquiry tasks. So before it was said, digital doesn't mean just put something from paper on the computer. We don't. So the PSIs are really, really cool. I think they're really, really cool. And they are actually little experiments that students go through. And this is one example from that. So they really call on students to integrate and apply process skills and content knowledge to solve mathematical problems and conduct little scientific experiments. And these tasks make the assessment much more enjoyable for participating students. They really like them. And at the same time, they create richer data to be analyzed by the researchers. Yeah, so this is an example of PSI's tasks. So this is actually the school party. So what students were supposed to do is plan for a school party. So based on attendance at last year's school party, they were asked to plan a party for 400 people. Oh, I have to click, because otherwise it doesn't work, I think. It will start moving now. So this is an example of an item. It asks students to complete this pie chart based on a table of results. This was actually one of the most difficult ones. And they can move it around, as you can see. And there were students, so you can see there are 6 parts. Most students took 8 times to try this. One student actually had more than 50 times trying this. So that student was just playing around with where I can put the bananas, I think. I don't think that had anything to do with actually answering the question. But they really seem to like this type of questions. Of course, we have also process data coming from a digital assessment. So allowing us to better understand the student approaches to solve mathematic problems. So for instance, we have process data on event time, navigation from screen to screen, where they're actually going, scrolling, use of calculators and rulers, because they're all in the system. Which is really useful in analyzing non-response data also, for instance. Because you can actually distinguish between students who ran out of time or those who just stopped responding before the time was up, for example. Oh, okay. We also have a longitudinal model coming up in TIMSS 2023. This is for the first time. So as I said before, we see grade 4 to grade 8 as a cohort longitudinal. But we had a lot of countries asking for an actual longitudinal study, which means that we are going to do that now. So we're going to assess students in 2023, and then we're going to assess exactly the same students a year later, which gives you a lot of interesting information. It also gives you a lot of administration in your country, so you have to figure out if that's what you actually want. Because you have to, so for instance in the Netherlands it's quite easy, because from 4th grade to 5th grade they stay in the same school, 99% of the students. In Germany the exact opposite happens, because in Germany from grade 4 to grade 5 you go to middle school. So you go to a totally different school, maybe in a different city, in a different... Tracking those students is much more difficult than tracking them in the Netherlands. But that's of course a national issue. You have to decide whether or not that's also why this is an optional module. You have to figure out if you can track them. If you can answer 2 quite interesting research questions. So first of all, what are the achievement gains as students progress from one TIMSS grade to the next? So either 4, 5 or 8, 9. And also which individual differences, as well as home, classroom and school variables, are associated with these achievement gains in a year. So I think this is a very interesting one. We have currently 11 or 12 countries signing up, so it's a very small study. We're asked to do this for Pearl, so the next Pearl cycle will also have this. So let's see what comes out of it. The researchers are very, very enthusiastic. So what are actually the benefits of participating in TIMSS for our country? So first of all, of course, policy-relevant information on context for learning mathematics and science. You have the group assessment, the group adaptive design to ensure alignment with student populations and a greater student engagement. You can obtain rich data from our country, from our questionnaire data, about the home and the school context for teaching and learning and reading. And of course, as I showed you, we have a variety of interactive item types. And we have enhanced international reporting that also includes the reporting of process data in this digital assessment. So now I have 2 minutes for policy implications. So I won't do that, but it is actually in the presentation if you want to see it. So I can show you a bit. So all countries have, of course, different policy implications, different things that they take away from it. I can tell you about a different one that's actually on these slides. The Netherlands, because that's the easiest one for me. So what happens in the Netherlands in the Pearls 2015 or 2011, I think, is that the Netherlands achievement, the Dutch achievement of the students was really, really high, at least for what we expected beforehand. So that was good. But what turned out was that we were really good. The Netherlands was really good in getting the lower achievement students to a certain point. So we had 100% reaching the lowest benchmark, 99% reaching the benchmark after that. But then our excellent students, so the students that are becoming our university professors or that are like really high in the workforce, they were really lagging behind. So we had like 7% of students reaching that highest benchmark, compared to other higher achieving countries had like 30% in there. So that was very, very clear. And that was an easy policy recommendation also. And our politicians took that to heart. So we have now, we call them GWAF classes for the students who are above the level of the other classroom students. So it really, you have to analyze the data. You have to see what's in the data to see what you can also say, okay, the Netherlands is performing, okay, so okay. But if you then dig into the data, you can see the differences between the students. You can see the differences between regions or between languages or between, for our benchmarks in our case. And that's what all these countries that are in the presentation also did. Dig into the data and then see what you can take out of it. And that's also something that we can help you with. So IEA will never give you the answer. We can't. But we can help you to get the data that you can get the answer from. And we can help you with capacity building. We can help you with trainings. We can help you how to analyze the data. We have different programs. We have ICT tools to analyze the data. And then you can come up with all these different policy recommendations or policy changes that can be made. Okay, I went 1 minute over.
I'll go to Federico first.
Well, thank you very much. Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much, Andrea. It was very clear, oh, well, I'm back. Content-rich presentation, and I really appreciated also the disclaimer you made about if you want to join a project like this, you really should know what you want to find with it, which is going back to what Professor Vichan was saying, and it's really true. I mean, a survey like this, like PISA, they create such a wealth of data at the end of it, which unless you had some very clear research questions in mind, you can easily lose yourself in. Yeah. And I think the presentation highlighted both strengths and weaknesses of international large-scale assessments. So, for example, the lag between the data collection and the releasing of the results is significant. And like PISA, the work on COVID-19, by the time the data comes out, who knows how relevant it will be. But it's also like a useful exercise for organizations to see how flexible and adaptable they are to these kind of topics, also in front of countries. So, and then what you said about don't change the measure if you want to measure change, is true. There is some, it's a little bit conservatory, because in the end there's a lot of innovation taking place. And in the end, you can do, I mean, the moment you do a transition from paper and pencil to digital, you do a linking study to make sure that your previous trends can follow the new ones. So it is, or the PSIs, the process data, there are so many innovations that you can maybe not, I mean, it's always not change, it's incremental change, but we can go toward disruptive change as well. So my question was about the slide you mentioned about the curriculum. So a big difference between PISA and your work is this is more curriculum aligned. How do you align a test with 60 countries to 60 different curricula?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So for the curriculum, there is actually, that's mostly the part of the NRC. So that's the national center that has to take care. So what happens when we, or Boston College, develops a test like this, is that you start with the first meeting discussing the framework. And as I said, we don't want to change everything, but there are innovations, there are changes. For instance, now changing to a digital measurement is different than paper pencil, which means that our framework changes. But countries are already involved from that part. So they get the framework, they have to respond to it, they have to make sure that it fits their national context also. And then you start, from that framework, you start developing the items. And what we do, and that's why there is innovation, but we also release certain items to make sure that the policymakers, for instance, understand what is actually being tested, but also for schools to have an example, or for researchers to have examples. So that means that there is also always about 60% that is being kept for the new cycle, and then there are always items that are being released. That is for all of our studies. And then the innovations you can make in the new items that you test in your field test. For all of these items, the countries see them first, the countries have 2 meetings to discuss them, and the countries actually write the items together with the International Study Center, together with the experts. So we have a full week where countries come together in a big hall, and together they write the items, and they make sure that what they see as their priorities are also in the items. After this big meeting, the study center comes together with the experts, and then they develop the items further. Some items don't make it, some items do make it. And then together you have these field test items, and you do a questionnaire, the NRCs do a questionnaire, seeing if there is a match between the items and your curriculum. And they have to fill that out. And actually beforehand, because we have been doing TIM since 1995, beforehand you might think, but there can't be an overlap. But there's a huge overlap. So there's no countries that are below 90%, I think, 88%, of the curriculum matching the test. Because apparently universal, there is a big overlap between what we actually are teaching students. And of course there are differences. So for instance, I remember this question in TIMS between Australia and the Netherlands, where there was, why do you protect yourself from the sun? Something like that. And in Australia, all students had this correct. So there was this ceiling effect, because they all knew. In the Netherlands, nobody knew. In the Netherlands, we have rain. We know what to do with rain, but with sun, that's a bit more challenging. You know, so these type of things happen, of course, where one country is better in a certain question, but overall you have so many items that levels out. What you can also, for instance, do in your national report, if there's actually one topic not being taught, you can of course reanalyze and see what is happening with that topic. But that doesn't happen often. That's really that's really rare that happens in the international study. So it's more on an item level, but not throughout, because throughout you have enough to balance to the curriculum.
Can I add to that question, actually? Because what I was thinking when you were talking about that is, how much have the mathematics curriculum changed since 1995?
Yeah, lots.
Lots.
Yeah.
But the whole world is changed at the same time, is what you're saying.
And yes, exactly. Everything changed.
Okay.
So that's also, we were just talking about this. So our study center at Boston College has been involved in Pearls and TIMS since the very start in 1995. So our study director, Aina Mullis, is now, I don't want to say her age, above 80, let's say that. She's still going strong, but she's going to retire this year. She deserves to retire also, but she will always be involved, I think. And we just had a meeting with her saying that she really wants to write a book about what all the changes are, because how you test and what you test in 1995 was so totally different than what you test now. But in general, the students are the same and the teachers are the same. And although the world changes, they still have the issues with like attitudes that are important, or certain school variables that keep being important and that keep being an interesting topic. But that's why our assessment does, if you look at the items since 1995 and we look at the items now, I don't think there's any overlap anymore, because they keep changing. Although you keep some of them, but trend to trend, they keep changing. But it's really, I think it's really interesting
so the follow-up question then is, how do you know children are achieving better, or you've just designed more achievable curriculums?
Or you designed what?
More achievable curriculums.
Yeah. I don't think. I mean, if you can read, right? If you have a text in front of you, or you have a form in front of you, and you don't know how to read it, then you can't read it. That was the same in 1995 and the same now. What I do think is important, that you don't adapt your curriculum to any PISA or IA studies. I think that's something that's you have to have your own curriculum, which gives you the best workforce in the end. So you know what your adults need to know to survive in your society, or to be good citizens in your society. And so I always fear, and we have a lot of discussions with new countries coming in both TIMSS and Pearls, but also ICCS. And then they say, okay, what are you then? What is your test? And then we can adapt. But you should never teach to the test. That's not the intention. The intention is that you do a test and then you can get your national results based on what you're actually doing, not based on what a test should measure. But
So I'm just trying to get my head around this. So you have observed massive curriculum change since 1995. But the degree of overlap between all these different countries you're working in has remained really consistent, and yet the drivers of curriculum change are not as a result of your research, but internal forces. That seems miraculous to me.
No, I mean, a curriculum changes according to what you have in society, right? I mean, the change to digital, the fact that you have now, everybody has an iPhone. You don't have to, for instance, cram data into your head anymore. You don't need to, because you can look everything up on Google. So the curriculum changes, and the things that you need to know changes, but that's worldwide. And that also means that the assessments change. I mean, everything changes with time, changes with new technologies, changes with, and that's also what our teacher workforce is doing now. I mean, they are, if you did your teacher education 20 years ago or 50 years ago even, you have to keep up with what is actually changing in the world, and you have to make sure that you can't teach the same way as you taught 50 years ago. You can't assess as you did 50 years ago. You don't have a curriculum as you had 50 years ago.
More questions, because I could ask lots of questions. Please, Ricardo.
Thank you, Andrea, for your inspiring speech. I have a question about the gender gap. Yeah. Because, I am in charge of standardizing the Wechsler scales in my country, and we do a very strong work in controlling bias, gender bias, okay? Mm-hmm. And we don't have any difference in mathematics ability between girls and boys, zero. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering why you obtain this gender gap in science and mathematics. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure that you control also the bias in the items, and so what's the explanation for that?
Yeah, I think so. Items and assessment for psychology are different than in the educational world. So what we have seen in the educational world since a long time, I think that's the same for PISA also, is that girls perform better in reading and boys achieve better in mathematics and science. Very general saying. That has been the case since the very first start of Pearl's, Tim's and PISA also. Yeah, now it's changed, exactly. So it's getting closer together in the last couple of decades or something like that. But that has always been the case. The reason for that, it's really difficult. So I did my PhD on Pearl's data. And what I have always been told by the experts is that girls just like reading more, so they have a better attitude. They actually, so in order to become a very good reader, you need to have the practice. So you need to read the books, and you actually need to spend time on it. And girls are just more interested in the topic. I think worldwide you see the difference for STEM topics. So boys are more interested. They go more often to universities that have something to do with mathematics or science, or they are more interested in that topic. I think that's just culturally defined that way. So it's very different than a psychology test where you want to get rid of that gender bias. It's just, I mean, we have teachers here also. I think that's something that you see in schools, that boys are more interested in the STEM topics than girls are, and girls are more interested in reading. But that changes. The world changes, so also girls change, and they somehow read less. Because why the gap is closing is, at least for a lot of countries in reading literacy, not because the boys are getting better, but because the girls are getting worse. So the gap closing is not really in the correct direction that we want it to be in, but still the gap is closing. Yeah.
Sorry, but I'm just noting that there is no an ability difference. There is probably a stereotype difference caused by school and curriculum, because I would say there is no natural
no. But it's not only
difference.
school and curriculum, that's also just the environment, right? So what we ask of girls from the very start is playing with toys, or playing with dolls, and boys are playing with cars and doing more scientific tasks already. And so from the very start of your upbringing, you're brought up differently, boys and girls. And that continues in schools. And schools, there are in all of the countries, I think, there are initiatives to get girls more involved in science and mathematics and STEM in general. But that takes time. But that's not something only teachers or curriculum or can change. That's something that is, in the whole environment, you still have gender differences in what tasks you do in your household, or what type of job you get in the end. So that's definitely not intelligence, or that's not something that you're born with, but that's how society treats you. And that's also why we hope that at one point the gap closes, and that you all have the same experiences and therefore also the same opportunities. But that's not the case yet.
More questions. Thank you, Hannah.
Questions and comments. First of all, I would also say gender stereotypes actually do have an impact, as you very nicely laid out. And actually, this is why in this round of the survey on social and emotional skills, we also have a part that looks at gender biases from parents, but also from teachers, because yes, we assume it's the case at home, but also in schools. And we want to understand better how that links then to well-being, but also to social and emotional skills. Then another point, I think it's very great that we have these different studies looking at different age groups, but also having a test that's more tied to the curriculum, whereas PISA is more tied to the competencies. And just to note,
Whether the studying the impact of COVID is obsolete, I would actually say no, because we are still struggling, we are still seeing the impact, and we need to know where we stand right now in terms of curriculum-wise achieved knowledge, and also with regard to competencies at age 15. So it's still important. That's one point. And the other point is also, I think we tend to be a bit more like, okay, it's over, it's behind us, let's forget about it. I think that's very risky, because it's very likely that there will be happening something in the future, and we need to use the COVID experience as a good way of showcasing how an effective response can look like, and to learn like, okay, are education systems right now ready? Did they learn already what they need to do for COVID, but also for other challenges? There's more to come, I can guarantee you. And we need to think about how to really restructure our systems to be more resilient. So I would say it's a brilliant showcase to learn across the world. I'm not saying it's brilliant that it happened, but it allows us a unique learning experience across countries for how challenges like these can be tackled, which can be globally happening, but also locally. I mean, we have some countries that are really repeatedly confronted by school closures due also to other catastrophes, you know, like earthquakes or whatever. So they can actually also learn from this experience, maybe. So I think it's very important that we take our time to make the best of learning experience from this crisis. And also, just to say, because you mentioned that digitalization has an impact on the teacher role and so on. And I think it's really, really important that we have a study, like your study, showing that actually teacher still is important, because what you also see that there are some people who are saying, well, now we have computers. Let's just put the kids in front of a computer, learn themselves. Forgetting about, yes, maybe we cannot continue like we've done before, but teachers still have an important role. And the other students in the schools themselves still have an important role. And I think there's a risk that this will be forgotten, but we really need to strengthen the point that teachers are still and will always be important, but their role, of course, has to change.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. Of course, teachers are not more or less important than they ever were. But I do think that we have to train them in using these digital tools also, and how they can best put them in. So we have a lot of questions about that in our teacher questionnaire, and a lot of them don't feel confident in using these tools that are that are there, that they can use. So we have to, with just in-service training, educate them again so that they are comfortable using those. And concerning the COVID question, we actually had, IA had together with UNESCO, which is called REDS. It's another study that we did during the COVID pandemic to see what was going on and to see, but I will present on that in the second part.
I'd like to understand more how TIMS can be used by an individual teacher whose grade had been tested to change their practice and move on.
So in the second part I will give more of our teacher materials also that we have. But just to be clear, TIMS is a national assessment, or is an international assessment, but for national use. So that means that with the sampling procedures that are set in place, you can't say anything about a student achievement, one student's achievement. You can say something on a national level about the student achievement in grade 8 or in grade 4. That's the same for PISA, that's the same for all these international large-scale assessments. The way they are set up, and they need to be set up to say something about the national curriculum or the national achievement, you can't say something on a student level or on a classroom level. Of course, we are creating materials for teachers that they can use in the classroom.
Right.
But
yes.
But
that's not
the one. No, that's coming from Tim. Yeah, you can take it from. But the results, like the number that you get, a student that you can't use, because there are too many. So we have 800 items, right? So a student gets a particular booklet with either with the group that they've assigned, so either easy or medium or difficult
Yeah.
questions in there. So the one student sitting here and the next student sitting there are getting a totally different assessment. So I can have 11 points, and that other kid can have 11 points, but the two things don't mean anything. 11 isn't the same. It is on a national level. On a national level, you can calculate, but not on a student level.
Because I meant to ask Hannah this question. Can I go back to you, Hannah, and say, with the social and emotional skills test, is it useful for the individual teacher whose children have been assessed?
Well, our survey is also more like it's representative for what is happening in the city. But however, it has been used in PISA for schools, for example, with a different sampling approach, with a different approach also with measuring, and really with the intention of helping schools. And we already saw that it was used with a convenience sample, but at least it gave some insights also on Thai schools. And they are still working on learning more from PISA for schools. So it can be used, but of course the approach needs to be different. We cannot just, and actually it is an advantage to draw on like this big picture that we draw in this representative international surveys, and then to have the teacher like inform them, okay, this is how it looks across these different contexts. We identify this as being key, and this is why you also answer this question. That actually puts it into a different place and really gives him a broader picture of, okay, so I'm assessing this now, I know now where I'm standing, I see around the world this is like a key thing that I need to work on and make sense, and let's do it. So I think it's a great initiative. It cannot be done in the same project, of course, due to the technical restrictions. Yeah.
Okay, are there other questions bubbling away? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas. So two quick technical questions and then one more general. So one, about the sampling, you mentioned the strict criteria about having a representative sample, which I really appreciate. So just a question, is it truly all schools in an area, including private schools, parochial schools, those types of things? If so, that's amazing. And then second, I'm curious, so you've moved to this digital environment with the new wave. And so why the group-based difficulty design and not, say, an IRT approach, which would allow you then to maybe have more adaptive based on the individual, not adaptive based on the group? And then the general question, which relates to that question, is I've always appreciated the IEA's role in terms of a really wide, diverse range of countries, and which is, I think, something to really celebrate. And so maybe you could speak more about your role, or the role of IEA in really diverse contexts. I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So first of all, yes, the general idea is to list all the schools and go from there. So if a country wants to exclude certain private schools, it has to be discussed, and it has to be below 5%. So the idea is there are always schools for special needs children, for instance, or schools that are really remote, you really can't access. And you, in theory, can have those out of the sampling frame as far as it's below 5% of your total target population. Then you should be fine. I think that's the easiest answer.
I had forgotten to ask my question. I had posted all my comments, and now I actually want to get something back from you to understand like which countries are actually participating in the longitudinal study, because I think that's such a great project. Because we've been trying with different surveys to come up with a longitudinal. And you are right, you can get very, very interesting insights, but I would like to know like some of the countries at least that...
I know I can come up with some, and Katie can come up with the others, I think. So it's definitely Italy, Sweden, Kosovo, Jordan, Korea. Yeah, it's Korea. Oh, she didn't know. Well, so there are more Western Balkans. Serbia, Bosnia, I think Bosnia-Herzegovina is there. I can't come up with more. They're on the IEA website probably, but we have a lot of studies with a lot of countries.
Okay, I will look it up. But great initiative. So
I
congrats.
One final question over here, and we'll go to lunch.
Indeed,
Don't ask such a deep one as you asked before.
quick one. The longitudinal is indeed quite an achievement and an aspiration. We'll give you the opportunity for conducting causal inference statistical analysis.
Yeah.
So that is, I think we need to share the data, share the process once it's successful and the challenges and how you negotiated the challenges. So and just two quick comments and two quick questions. One on bullying. I think it is very important that you've included the bullying items in your questionnaire, and I think it's going to be exerting a huge amount of influence and impact on your results. We indeed found that bullying contributes more than 6% in the variation on children's well-being. So I suspect you're going to find similar results on your scores as well. I have another comment around the environmental awareness. I think that's also another excellent initiative. But I will talk to you a little bit later about some of those results and how one could access those results. I feel that those themes are, the theme of environmental awareness is going to be very important moving forward. Then my questions. Have you noticed any, as it relates to variability of the scores, have you noticed a greater degree of variability within countries than between countries? And then the second question, how are you negotiating the bureaucratic processes around research ethics and access to children?
Yeah. So the across country, within schools, that really differs so much between the different countries. That's very difficult to give an international answer to that. I don't think PISA can do it either. It really needs to be looked at from a country level, how that differs. So our GDPR, our rules, how you can address students, what you can actually, what type of data you're actually allowed to have from a specific student has changed a lot. So GDPR is the rules according to for data protection, which we have now in Europe, but everybody all over the world has a GDPR, is just what we call it in Europe. So to be honest, 20 years ago we weren't even much bothered with it. Now we have 2 GDPR officers full-time in IEA. Because the rules differ per country. That was also a big challenge with longitudinal, because you have to track the names of the students, because you have to know this is Henk and then this is Henk, because you have to match them up a year later. So you have to make very specific contracts to make sure with the schools and to make sure that you are allowed to do that. And of course, afterwards, everything is anonymous. You can't in any way, shape or form track a student or know what a student's achievement is or know what a teacher has answered, or even you can't track a school that participated in a study or in a specific country, because you're not allowed to do that. So everything is totally anonymous at the end, at the database phase, but with longitudinal it is a bit of a struggle to get the rules and regulations set that you are allowed to track those students within a year.
Yeah. I think we need to be careful, and we're moving into a realm now where we need to strike a balance between issues around research ethics and the advancement of science, because it is, we're certainly finding that the bureaucratic processes are in fact constraining not only the research, but constraining that the children's voices are brought to the fore. So somehow, and this is happening and being experienced at an international level across all studies that involved working directly with children. And I think we need to think about how we strike that balance. And I'm a member of an institutional review board.
Okay, we're going to go to lunch now. Thank you for an absolutely fascinating morning from everybody, and not only from our wonderful presenters, but everyone's really coming in with comments and questions and so forth, which has really increased the value of it all. We'll give you an hour for lunch. It's 1:45. Let's come back. Sorry, it's 1:45. Yes, let's come back at 1:45.